Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Ah, there he is, the Greek.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Commission to order. It is Tuesday, July 16th, and it is 5:06 p.m.
Roll call. Chair Giuliani.
Yes. I'd like to, before we begin though, John, I'd like to ask, hopefully, roll call.
Sounds good, Chair. Chair Giuliani.
Yes, here.
Vice Chair Rossi.
Here.
Commissioner Quaid.
Here.
And Commissioner Ho is absent tonight. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Before we begin, I'd like to call upon our city council liaison to give us a bit of an update on the LSL conversations that are happening and what we can expect from that and what potential impacts that might have on tonight's proceedings and next week's proceedings.
Oh, okay, sure. So, you know, we talked to, and I think, John, I can't remember if you were in part of the initial April discussion with LSL, but LSL is an accounting firm and a consultancy firm. One of the principals is a woman named Wendy Telford, I think.
Kelly.
Sorry, Kelly Telford. Thank you. And I talked to Armene back in April and asked her to set up a call with them, knowing how understaffed we were, particularly with respect to accounting functions. So we talked to Kelly, and then I think we left it to staff to continue talking to LSL about the needs and and what needed to happen, or what would really help the city. As I understand it, there was a meeting. The staff came here for about a day and a half. This was probably a month ago.
Yeah.
And I think you had some conversations about how LSL could help our accounting function, particularly given our short staff. One of the things they recommended was, they could do bank reconciliations, but they can basically do the whole gamut of functions if we wanted them to. So we had some great conversation, and then staff had some follow-up conversation. There is a new contract with LSL in the city council packet for tomorrow night's meeting for consideration for approval. I think it's on the consent calendar.
Yes.
It's on okay. But basically the idea of that contract, as I understand it, is that LSL will come in and kind of assess where we are and help us with bank reconciliations and help us with a lot of the accounting functions that we just haven't had the staff to do. I think it's been very taxing on our finance department. So my also understanding is that they're going to be somewhere coming in, and Brian, you might be, and John, somewhere in the next week and a half, they're coming in.
I believe they're coming in, for some reason, I want to say like August 5th or somewhere right around that time frame,
Okay.
but I could be mistaken. I wasn't really part of that aspect of the conversation.
Okay, yeah, I think, well, I thought
it might be sooner than that.
August 1st, but Brian, is it August 1st? Yes. So then just sort of a final update. I participated in a phone conversation with Brian and Lewis and Evelyn that we had yesterday with Kelly from LSL, and we kind of talked through some of our challenges, including several months of bank reconciliations that have not yet been, don't have the staff to complete those. Talked about month-end closing processes, which she's hoping to bring to the city. Think we don't really have a month-end closing process, which she said is very common in agencies, but she would like to bring that process and just kind of get to the bottom of some of the issues and challenges that we've had over the year that we just don't have the staff to get to those, just keeping up with the budget and ACTFR and all of those things. So I think that's going to be a really great, assuming that contract gets approved by the city council, I think that's going to be a really great fresh set of eyes to come in and a lot more new hands to come in and really help our finance department and get to the bottom of some of the issues that I think we have as a city council and you as a finance commission have been challenged with over the last year. So I'm very hopeful that contract gets approved and that they can come in and really help out.
Thank you for that update. I really appreciate it. It feels like that is going to be very helpful in our conversations this evening, and it will be very helpful in our conversations next week. This evening, we're going to be focusing on revenues and CIP, as well as the
Master fee schedule.
master fee schedule. I'm going to be an absolute tyrant to keep us on those topics, please. Okay. And then next week will be the focus on expenditures, and we'll bring the work product from this evening and next week together, present it to city council with our thoughts and or recommendations. Does that sound reasonable, everyone? Fine. Any public comments?
We currently don't have any hand raised, but it looks like Mr. Betta might have a comment for us.
Good evening, Josh. How are you?
You're hitting it out of the park. I'm feeling great over in the grandstand here. The dominant culture in this community is wrong. You guys are right. What you've done the last several months, continuing appropriations resolution, the opportunity to finally create the answers. I appreciate you so much. Thank you, Pete. With termination comes other shoes that drop, other skeletons in closets, though. It always happens. I'm sure you've been through it. What's determinant now is the attitude that your staff bring into these meetings. No more defensiveness. I ask for no more singular arguments. Our auditors have the responsibility to meet ethical responsibilities of their own industry, not the cities. It's greater than the cities. They have opportunity to delay field work. They have opportunity to terminate their contract with us. They have opportunity to have an opinion of disclaimer. Why do I say that? I say that because we have a red hot internal control problem here. Mr. Downs has been in charge of every aspect of accounting for 7 months. He's doing his own work without check and balance. He's updating the general ledger without supervisorial approval. It's a very serious business. He's made a number of appropriations throughout the year, carryovers, and implemented elaborate transfers systems within the general ledger. Very complicated. You mentioned the bank reconciliation. Mention also the $5 million economic miracle we had in the budget turnaround that your staff is proposing to you still. I ask you, do we have a serious internal control problem for your consideration? Do we have that? Lansell and Longhard, outstanding firm. I had the privilege of working with them several times. But they are coming in to assist the staff. They are not in charge of the department. So the question is, who's in charge of the audit? Is it Mr. Downs auditing himself? Can't have that happen. Mr. Miller, $240,000 contract, no scope of service that suggests he's working in accounting management. He's not the finance director either. Evidently doesn't have plans to do that. The people ask, that Scott Miller accept the finance director position. He will be the only logical person to put this organization into position to bring an audit through. I call on him to step up to this. And if it's $240,000 for responsibilities that none of us understand, I call him to terminate his contract. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any hands raised on the Zoom call?
No other hands raised, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. John, you're going to kick us off? And John, what I would ask you to do, we're going to be taking copious notes at this end. What I'd ask you to do is when we decide on the numbers around revenues, we may have something different than what you're recommending. And we would ask you to note what we've recommended, what we've asked you to take forward to city council. Okay. So, well, I'm going to try to keep the jostling back and forth to a minimum and just let's land on the right numbers. And with Ted's assistance, we're going to land on the right projects for CIP. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Honorable Chairman and Vice Chairman and Commissioner. Good evening. So tonight we have three things on the agenda. So the first, we're going to be discussing about the master fee schedule. We're going to follow that up with a discussion on general fund methodologies, the methodologies that we use in developing our estimates, revenues, our estimates. And we will be following that up with Public Works discussing the capital improvement program. So with that said, I want to start off with the master fee schedule. So the master fee schedule is adopted every year, and it's a very, in many ways, it's a very perfunctory process where we always update it based on the consumer price index every year. This is a standard practice on every single city I've ever been at, which is quite a few cities on there. So when we went through this process for this year, we used the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we used their information from February. And so the consumer price index was 3.4%. So that is the basis for all of our changes within the master fee schedule. With that said, on the master fee schedule itself, before I go into any specifics on it, so we did a public hearing last month. Tomorrow night will be the second public hearing related to this. The master fees, they were published in a local newspaper. So a couple of other things I want to point out in here. So the master fee schedule, what it does not include the business license fees. It does not include water and sewer rates. Those are separate legal statutes that we have to follow. And so we have schedules for those as well. And so usually we have every 5 years you go out and you have an update on your fees for water and sewer. We have not done that yet. That will probably be happening sometime in this current fiscal year.
John, can I ask you, why doesn't it include the business license fees?
Typically, the business license fees are a different animal, and so we treat them differently. Usually, business license fees frequently are voter approved, and so it's a different process anytime you adjust business license fees.
So let's say instead of typically, specifically, so are we making any changes to business license fees in this budget?
No, we are not.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yep.
John, I have a question also.
Sure.
The CPI
Mhm.
was as of February 3.4.
That is correct.
Is it, do you consistently use February? Because I noticed that for June, the CPI was 3.2.
That's a good question. And well, ironically, so we used February at 3.4. Ironically, in March, so you know me, I'm always looking for more revenue, right? That's always going to be my bias, and I apologize for that. So even in March, it was 4 in there. So I was a little bummed that we didn't use March, but nonetheless, in there, it's really good in practice to be consistent with
That's-
that.
yeah.
I can't answer your question off the top of my head. I would
Okay.
have to go back and look.
That's
Uh,
what I was looking for, was consistency. Is it
Yeah,
typically
no, and that's a
February
valid point.
CPI that's being used?
And we can look into that and follow up. Sure. So Stephanie's gonna, she can weigh in on that.
I actually not only think that we should look into that, I think there should be a policy recommendation made to that to have consistency, whether we pick a specific month or do an average. It needs to be something more consistent and clear.
I
out
agree.
of The CPI.
I
So
agree.
to answer your question, the resolution passed by council specifically asks that we use the February time period when we do this increase of CPI.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. That's very,
So Stephanie, that is February every year? Yeah, okay, so
Perfect.
there is a policy in place. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, and specifically related to that, there is there's a city council resolution at 7613 that really addresses this topic. So I would reference that for anyone who's interested in looking at that. And that's contained within the staff report as well.
Chair,
please.
I believe
Huh.
we approved did we approve for on first reading the master fee schedule? Because at that time, you know, it was CPI was we were told the CPI was 3.4% on
Correct.
February. So it's not that we said use February, it's just that was came to the council.
Right.
Which I think was consistent with the prior years.
Right.
And then also, and I think it's in here, there's a study on fee. You can change the fees every 3 to 5 years, or that's customary or
Yes.
somehow. But you have to have a master fee study.
So for that, with respect to that, usually what's done is a good business practice is every 5 years, you do a cost-based fee study where you bring in some experts and they go through all of the fees, they update the costs, and usually you'll see very significant adjustments in all the fees in there. It's just a very good practice to have. The city has not done that in the past. We have, we're going to utilize Wildan to do just that. But there's another aspect of this also that hasn't been done, and that is a indirect cost allocation plan. And so we're going to have both of those done at the same time. And the significance of the indirect cost allocation plan is it allows us to charge for overhead costs from water and sewer to help fund general operations on there. But you have to have the indirect cost allocation plan to do that. Number one, that allows us for, say we're doing some grant project and we want to have normally, we've used the term fully burdened rate for employees here, and that the implication of that is, you're covering not only salaries, but your fringe benefits. But really a fully burdened rate includes overhead as part of a calculation. That's never been done here. So this will allow us to do that on a go-forward basis.
So I was going to say, I mean, I think one thing I'd like to see the council do is Mr. Downs actually expressed the bias that tends to come from the city side, which is looking to get as much revenues as possible. But there's another side to this, which isn't being considered, which is what is it that you want to incentivize to occur in the city? So I know that business licenses aren't part of this particular fee study that we're looking at right now, or fees. But, speaking to vendors this weekend who said that the city has kind of applied high business permit fees on the, arts crawl. And as a result, we have fewer vendors who have shown up because they also included, now they have to have insurance that they have to cover. Similarly, I look through this and I think there are things in here that you say, what's the strategy behind some of these fees? And has that ever been part of the consideration? Not just trying to capture as much revenue as possible, but what is it that you're trying to encourage or discourage? And how are you living up to the services that are being provided for that? I mean, a simple one, it's just a cute, simple one, which is just, the little street block parties. Is it really cost like 300 something to go through and do those little block party permit and a couple hundred every year after that? Is that something you want to be encouraging more of that type of activity? We have in this fee structure too, and it's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, has been on trees. And the reason is if someone has a dead tree and it costs several $1,000s to remove that dead tree. Now we have in here a tree removal permit that is going to be $376.
Which are
plus-
difficult to get.
Those are difficult to get. Then you have private property tree removal for developments. And that is also, that adds three more trees to that. And so that's another like $522 plus the cost of every additional tree that the city says it's based off of the diameter. What isn't considered in this is the unintended consequences, which is when people then don't go to remove dead trees and the fire risk that occurs. We had a neighbor who had their pine tree went like that. It was, they'd grown up with the pine tree. They had no intention of removing it, but it became one giant matchstick. And the idea of asking a senior couple on a fixed income to, in addition to the several $1,000s it took to remove the tree, add several $1,000s in fees. I don't think it's something that the council has considered that.
Yeah, so, Commissioner Rossi, what I hear you saying and what I'm hearing, cheers over on the other side of me here, in support of you, is that in addition to reviewing the fees, we should be reviewing what is the underlying intent of the fees
Correct.
to ensure that the fees are in fact doing what we want them to do as a city. So the recommendation we would make to the city council is during that review that John just spoke about, we should also be reviewing the fees to say, hey, does this meet the intent of the culture that we're trying to build here at South Pasadena?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I think that the sort of the second reading of this particular fee schedule is also tomorrow night.
Mm.
But I think the idea was let's get the CPI in here, knowing that we're going to have a fee study. I do think we asked the question, are fees ever decreased? And I think the answer was yes.
Yes,
Stephanie
and
Esteban are
frequently
nodding their heads, yes.
that not only that, a lot of cities. So even, because I've had a lot of cities where I've done, cost-based fee studies, and a lot of times there's certain fees that the city takes a position as a matter of policy not to fully recover the cost of it, depending on the nature of what the fee is. And so those are very much policy decisions that are unique to each city. Everyone has their different criteria of what they view as obviously more important and less important in there. But that's a standard practice on every city I've ever been at, where it's not always across the board. Usually with the master fee schedule in of itself in the CPI, it's usually very perfunctory. They just approve it. Where they make the changes that Vice Chair is mentioning is usually when after we've done the cost-based fee study, and here's the results, here's the recommendation on all the fees, then at that point, that's really where from a policy standpoint, the decisions are made. Do they really want to recover all of that cost or not?
Right. And where I guess I have a couple concerns is that you're looking at last year, there was a 5.1% CPI increase. I'm assuming that it wasn't much less than 3.4% the previous years, which means that over the last 5 years, we've had over 20% increase in the fees. And the question again I have, which is, should there be a little bit closer look on these fees and how it's impacting? So filming is one of the interesting ones too, where we're struggling to get filming, yet we're raising the fees on the filming. And just thoughts that, might need to have some consideration to it. And similarly, it looks like there's a struggle on plan checks that I'm seeing on the revenue side. And yet, you're seeing increases, the largest dollar increases, not percentage increases, are actually coming from planning. And just wanting to make sure, what are we trying to, there's capturing the revenue. In this case, you're talking about a maximum of $29,000 increase. If you adopt this, what we'd be adding to the general fund would be about $29,000 increase versus what are the things we want to be making sure that we're helping support and incentivize. And that's And again, and because it's been brought up, which is the overhead. I understand the desire to put overhead into it, but that means then there needs to be very careful management of that overhead.
Mhm.
So that you're not, if you have a bloated overhead thing that's starts to occur and the fees are going up and you're making it harder and harder for people to get what they need to be getting done. So it just has to be a more nuanced discussion.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the recommendation when I've seen the nodding heads is that when this study is done, then there needs to be a comprehensive review and policy considerations about we could raise it this high or we could lower it this much. And are there things that we want to lower even if the study didn't say one way or the other? So it looks
Yes.
like it just needs to be a comprehensive policy overview of what to do with these fees. And I think, John, is it right? You can't actually, well, I don't know if this is true. You can only go up CPI. I guess you could always come down, but there are rules around how you can
So,
change these fees.
Yes, the reason why, you do the fee studies is because you have to justify the fee. So the fee cannot exceed cost.
Right.
So that is the number one reason why a fee study is done. It's really to justify the cost on a particular activity, if you will, or fee. There's always a potential for that. I've seen cities, particularly on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, where they've had really high fees on certain things, and they've been challenged. They've been challenged in court, and where they've had to lower the fee.
Yeah.
And so, just as a general rule of business practice, you don't want to be egregious on fees. So generally people stick to the CPI unless you've done a fee study.
Oh, go ahead,
And we
finish.
did get a public comment, actually.
Well,
Mhm.
and I'll ask really quickly. So in that fee study, will they also be looking at developer impact fees?
That will be a separate component. So that is going to happen, but it's really going to be a separate component from our master fee schedule there.
Okay.
It's almost a different animal. And so it's a very robust study with that, because developer impact fees are generally, very expensive. My criticism of them is that it's only a one time, for cost. And, like, for example, if you have a large, whatever, apartment complex that it's going up or whatever, the impact, water, sewer, streets, trash, traffic, all of those things are quite extensive, and they're ongoing.
Do we have any sense of when that study will be happening? Because I feel like there are obviously developments in the wings. We need to probably figure that out.
Mhm, we
Yes.
do.
And let me have Ted Gerber, Public Works Director, speak to that. We've had quite a bit of conversations, but I'd rather him
Perfect.
speak to that.
So Ted, just when you thought you were going to be able to relax for a couple of minutes, right? Okay.
I never thought that.
Never thought that for a moment. Okay, good.
Smart man.
Good evening, commissioners. Yeah, the reason John and I have been talking about this is all pretty linked. The evaluation of our maintenance of effort, the developer impact fees, the nexus study that's required in order to do that, the master user fee review, and the cost allocation basis, and then the indirect cost allocation. All four items that we're talking about here are all kind of linked. And so we're having one of our on-call vendors, the financial wing of their organization, help us with all of this work. So this work exceeds $30,000 to do all these components. We have to come to council with this effort. We're really just trying to understand the total scope of what needs to happen.
Mhm.
We have a rough scope of work drafted, and we have a rough understanding of what it's going to cost. So once we are done with this, we'll bring this to council and ask for, the authority and the appropriation to move forward.
That would be to do the study that John has mentioned.
It would be basically the four elements of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Janet, just a question. It feels like the And I really like your idea of bringing this, once that the study is completed that John has recommended, bringing this back to council to take a look at it. But who is going to be responsible for going line by line through this fee schedule to answer Commissioner Rossi and Janet, pardon me, Cynthia's questions about, does it make sense based upon what we're trying to accomplish as a city?
I think that's a very good question.
I get lucky every once in a while. Okay.
I think presumably it will be the city manager.
So the new city manager is the person who would.
I would think so, working with the department heads on the fees. And Ted, maybe I'm wrong.
Let me add some perspective of how the process works. That might answer your question. So, your current fee schedule reflects a whole bunch of programs.
Yep.
And what we assume happened when this was first established was that someone basically did a time cost study and this is what it takes to issue a tree permit. If you have a public hearing at NREC, even inspector that goes out, you may even have an arborist involved. These are the costs. And then at some point, that evaluation was brought before, a city manager or some subcommittee. And there was a lot of details that followed that. When it was brought to council, the council may have had some policy direction on, we don't want to charge 300, let's make that 200 or something like that. And so, it's staff's job to inform what the cost deference of that is going to be. And so that will all be part of this evaluation. The level of detail to which, any number of people want to review it, it will be available. So now to that point, things are going to change. Like there's fees on here that we might not fully understand how they were established. So like, the block party example you gave, I have just a guess that at some point that fee was established with the understanding that staff was drafting traffic control plans on behalf of community members. That's not something we really do and we shouldn't do. So, that might reduce the cost, what the actual cost of doing it is, because there's not that work element. So a lot of these are going to change because programmatically our understanding of how they work is different than when they were first established. So you will see some modifications, things could go up, things could go down. We expect to add some items because there's processes that happen in the city that aren't captured in the fee schedule. And it's not so much that we want to charge more money. It's more like, well, no one knows, how this works because there's no fee established for it.
Okay.
I do think, Councilmember Braun, that the city council needs to be part of the policy discussion because there are issues in here that are very policy related. I mean, even as simple as the trees. The reason I understand where that fee came from, which was they wanted to keep people from going down and like taking out great old trees and putting it because they wanted a view. So they were trying to add something in there, but then they weren't thinking when this making that, they weren't thinking the unintended consequences of what happens when the tree's dead.
Right.
And the cost burden that it places on people in that case. I think similarly, there are just some policy decisions in here which are really a matter of what is it that you want to incentivize. So even when it comes to whether it's public works or planning, like I know the backflow valve, unfortunately, that issue way too well now. And I know that vast majority of the homes in the hills don't have backflow valves. So if that's something that you want to start saying, we want to encourage people to do it, then you have to be thoughtful in your fee structures so that you're encouraging them to do it versus creating a situation that's creating additional burden to them.
Yeah.
So once the fee structure is created too, Sheila, what we need to do is empower our staff to look at the situation and not in black and white, but understand there's gray, especially like the elderly couple who had the dead tree in their backyard. And they couldn't afford to take care of it. So again, changing the culture of our staff that says Ted can come to us and say, hey, we normally charge $1,000. It doesn't make any sense to do this. This is out of kilter with what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. And it might be situations where you consider, do we have something for people who are on fixed incomes or lower incomes
Absolutely.
as well? Because like I said, I know the cost of removing a tree, it's thousands.
Yeah.
My sense is that I think that the council could give initially give general guidance, but I think for the council to go through line by line is probably
Not
not,
line by line, but come back.
like,
with-
it's just like if we said, look, here, think about these things and give direction to staff. And then for staff to come back and give recommendations.
Okay.
Exactly. And, let's use the tree example just as we're talking about it here. So, there's a difference in whether you have people who are trying to remove dead vegetation as a safety condition
Right.
versus somebody who wants to remove trees because
Better
they
view.
want to expand their house.
Yeah.
And
Right,
these trees are in the
exactly.
way.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, those are the types of things that we already have those types of circumstances reflected in our procedure and code. It's just a matter of them being reflected in the fee schedule.
Yes. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so what I heard, and let me try to distill it down. The fee schedule, John, you're making a recommendation in the moment that we look at the fees and just use a CPI from February of 2024
Mhm.
as the benchmark for the fee increases. The second thing you're suggesting is that we engage with a consulting firm that will come in and review this and rationalize this based upon best practices throughout Southern California or beyond. The third thing we need to do is then present it to City Council, and City Council then ask the new city manager, whomever she is, to take a look at this line by painful line, because frankly, this is going to be a heavy lift, and working with his or her staff, say, what makes sense, Ted? Talk to me about this. Does this, and if Ted can look me dead in the eye and say, I have no idea how we arrived at this number initially, then let's think about how we're going to do that. Does it need to be reevaluated? And if so, what does that take to do that?
One of the opportunities that I think both the commission and the council will really appreciate when we do this study. So we go through all the fees and we will have workshops literally on these fees and the results. And here's how this number was come about for this particular fee. And it's almost not so much for the number, whatever the dollar amount is the understanding of the process, the things that the effort that goes on to providing that service, if you will,
what
and
we're
giving
trying-
that perspective as you're looking at numbers.
And what we're trying to accomplish with the fee.
Yes, yeah, and absolutely. And
Absolutely.
again, frequently when I've done these, there are certain fees where councils and commissions decide, no, we want to subsidize this for whatever the reasons are that they have as a matter of policy. There's rarely, in my experience, I've never had 100% of the cost-based fee study numbers approved.
John, has city council already given the directive to look into getting this fee study up and running? Or
So
get information on it? And
yeah, I originally started the conversations on this in, I want to say in January. And I started working with Ted probably in late January, early February. We started having discussions and firms that specialize in this, because there's quite a few firms that specialize in this service. So we have a few in mind that have just extensive experience with this. They do this for everybody on there. I have set aside within the 24-25 budget $45,000. I broke it down, basically 35,000 for the cost-based fee study, 10,000 for the indirect cost allocation plan. I based those numbers. I reached out to several firms and got kind of rough estimates. What am I looking at for a city of this size? Population 26,000, general fund revenues of approximately $40 million, ballparking it to have some kind of reasonable estimate.
So John, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a very, did I answer your question? Any follow-up? Okay. Pardon me. So that I'm not sitting here having the same conversation in 2025.
Right.
When will that study take place? When can we reasonably expect that study to have taken place?
So as I mentioned, ideally, we would have some sort of budget to work off of. We'd come to council.
That's our
Um,
job, yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha.
We'd
Okay.
come to council after that so that we can, have the contract approved, appropriated. And then that study is going to take at least 6 months. you've mentioned the level of detail it takes. And when I've done studies like this, you literally take the people that are involved in the work process, you find out how much time they're spending, what
Mhm.
their rates are, and then that's your cost. And then any other direct costs that are allocated to it.
So we have a 6-month study. Then we're
At
going to
at
ask our
least.
new city manager, she, to go through it line by line and rationalize it. So we could be sitting here in 2025 having a discussion about this.
You will be, but the idea would be that you'll be adopting that into your next budget.
Makes sense to me.
Because I think they're also going to be needing to fix the accounting, to be able to do a cost-based accounting. You need to make sure that they know what's happening on a regular basis. I have one additional question, which is, so when it says the 2025, when do these fees go into effect?
So these fees would go into effect upon adoption from the city council.
So,
So normally the default would be July 1st, but so this would probably be August 1st or September 1st.
so how does that impact, like Camp Med? Because if there are students who are in the summer program, how does that impact those families?
It probably would not impact them simply because those activities are already going right now.
Okay.
And so by the time these fees are ready to be implemented, that time would pass.
Okay.
So I believe to your point, Sheila, any resolution we do make indicates, or should indicate that the new fees would take effect upon approval by city council.
Yes,
And then move forward. We can't collect the fees retroactively.
we would not go retroactive. We
Okay?
would not go retroactive.
We'll have a riot in city, okay, if we try to do that.
Yeah, no.
Upon-
And we may have it where we say
Upon
60
passage of
60
budget.
days
Oh,
upon
I think
council
that's right.
approval.
So again, the city council approved it once, but it has to be read twice, I think.
Correct.
And then I think you're right, because I was looking through my packet today. I think it's not effective for 60 days.
Yeah,
Until after the second passage by I might not be using the right words, but
Yes.
the second time the city says good, it's 60 days from that. So if that gets passed tomorrow, be 60 days from July 17th.
So you're going to be reviewing this tomorrow.
It's on the agenda for tomorrow.
On the agenda. Okay. So what do you need from us, Janet, in anticipation of this being on the agenda tomorrow? Do you need us to make a recommendation?
I think if you want to make the recommendation about looking for the study, or like whether you think the study is a good idea. I mean, I think that the study was presented to us as something that was going to happen.
Okay.
I don't think we've acted on that, but it was part of the materials that we were going to do this study.
Right. And
So-
normally for the
Okay.
master fee schedule, this is almost more informational only
Okay.
for the commission, not necessarily to make a recommendation on the master fees.
Right.
But I believe it's still your prerogative, if you feel compelled to do so, to still whatever note, whatever the opinions are of the commission.
Yeah, I think
Commissioners, any more questions, comments?
I mean, I understand this idea of, I think that the problem has been actually that it's been an almost automatic. Like
I'm
every,
sorry, did-
I think the problem has been that it's been almost automatic,
It
and
has been.
really, I think the fee schedule should be something that's annually reviewed from a strategic lens.
well, and
and
that's what we're
with it-
doing now.
yeah,
And
with
so
an
so you're right, but
with an understanding of saying, hey, what's happening, or is anything having, is anything having an adverse impact on what we're trying to do?
yeah, I would agree that I think
So-
just
so more than everybody.
historically, it's not been
Yeah, and
looked at it from a policy perspective, but I think we're now moving forward in the right direction.
We have a chance to hit the reset button here. Yeah. Okay.
And maybe that's your recommendation, is to sort of,
Right.
from a policy perspective, look at the fees.
Perfect. Before I ask and make a recommendation for a voice vote amongst the commission, I believe we should ask for any comment.
We do have an in-person card from Mr. Betta and no hands are raised at this time.
John, thank you for guiding us through this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
If wishes were horses, then we wouldn't be in the middle of a disaster several years in the beginning. The culture that Ms. Japarian created, I want you to pay attention to, in my estimation. It was constantly a promise about something that was going to happen. It generally was about spending a lot of money on a contract. Cost allocation study, absolutely. Fee study, absolutely. But the problem with the lack of public record in this community that contributes to the culture of failure is that no one is responsible in the future. We're talking in good faith right now about something that will happen. Promises. Mr. Parian was excellent, outstanding in her ability to shift responsibility to a commission or the council, where the promise of what would happen was forgotten, never reported on in many, many instances, and no one remembered. That means the shift went to the council and the commissions to remember something that was staff's job. I don't want you, it's a fait accompli, I understand this vote. But this study, when, who is going to do it, and what is the guarantee that my commission can have on the public record that someone will be responsible for this? This is the culture that has to change, of promises with no follow through. I believe it can be done. I've worked in these agencies that made their own ticklers. We work for you. How to do that? Break the culture. I ask you, think of a different way. Here is something promised to you, but right now, give us what we want. We've acted in bad faith toward our community. We have voted in new taxes with the expectation that the community acts responsibly. In our first response to a culture crisis and train wreck of finance, the staff is saying, but give us our revenue first before we actually answer the questions. I beg you to slow it down. There will be no motivation from the staff to bring back anything for prioritization or close scrutiny if you give them what they want right now. Put the onus on the staff to bring back the study first and watch how quickly that will happen. That's what staff's supposed to do. I ask you to try to do this in your culture. Get it on public record. Let's make a good faith response to our community. We don't need a few hundred extra $1,000. The problem is too large. Let's not have our first response go to taxation. It's not taxation, it's a fee. I understand that. But a lot of people respond to these things like it is a taxation. There's a lot of people wondering what the hell is going on with fees and how it's what service they're being provided. Take your time, please.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other comments or questions?
Fees are taxes. They are. And I agree with the public comment on this, is that there hasn't been any attention paid to it. The fees, last year's fee, the CPI index was 5.1%. That was kind of a considerably high fee increase for people. So it said, I ran the numbers, and it's over 25% increase over the last 5 years in the fees. I think there needs to be some, I'm in the economist sort of camp, is you have to give incentives, and it's a carrot stick sort of thing. So yeah, I would recommend not passing these.
This until the fee study is done?
Correct. So the difference, the financial difference is less than $29,000. So when you look at it across the entire current services that they have, it's not a huge dollar amount, and it's not gonna break the bank, but I think it's more of a message from my perspective to say it's time that we go ahead and address this rather than just letting it continue going up and up. And I don't know how to get it to the attention other than to say that it's time to go ahead and say, maybe we just don't pass this one because we want to see that fee study done faster. And there's some areas where we'll actually see higher fees, and they might be appropriately higher. And we just need to, like, for me, it's in creating incentive. That's it.
Great comments. Thank you very much. And the only add I would put to that is that we don't pass this. We make a recommendation to the city council to pass it. So, what I'm hearing you suggest, Sheila, is that we as a commission, recommend to city council that they do not, approve the new fee schedule until after the study is completed and it has been reviewed by the new city manager in concert with his or her staff.
So in that case, the current fee schedule would just stay in place,
Yes.
correct?
Which the current fee, the new fees aren't in the current budget anyway. So it won't impact anything on this budget. But it will just say, especially if we can push to have it done within the next 6 months, then say, okay, let's go ahead and have it done then.
Okay. Would you like to make that yeah, huh?
You said it's so good.
Let's see if I can resurrect that. My vacation aloha is slowly melting away, I assure you. Our recommendation is that the city council postpone approving the fee schedule, the proposed fee schedule until after the study is complete and the study has been presented to the new city manager and he or she has had the opportunity to review it with their department heads.
I second.
It's not an item to be voted on.
It's just a recommendation.
recommendation.
Just around.
So we're just making a
yes.
formal, we're making a formal vote on a recommendation
Yeah.
that we're
Got it.
sending.
Got it.
Okay.
So
So,
Okay.
yes, please.
Okay, roll call. Chair Giuliani,
Approved.
Vice Chair Rossi,
yes,
Commissioner Quaid.
Yes,
And Janet, do you understand as our city council representative, what we're trying to communicate here? Okay?
I believe it is on the consent agenda. Correct.
but I think, Janet, that, I mean, that speaks also to the culture that's been at the commissions. So we get brought this as informational. So the question is, why do we even bother to review it if it's on your agenda for the very next night as a consent item? It doesn't seem, from my perspective, that there's a desire to have our recommendations or inputs, and that's
So I
Yeah.
think that a couple things. Look, I think there's a lot going on in our city right now. We
Right?
don't have a city manager. We do have 2 co-acting city managers, which is great. We don't have a approved budget because the city council did not act on the budget. There's a lot still going on with housing. There's a lot of things happening,
Mhm.
right? I understand the point about the culture. There's some, the commissions are being looked at. That's one of the issues that we've had, right? Not just in terms of consolidating commissions, but sort of how do we better engage the commission? So I think that's being looked at. So, I think if you have specific suggestions, I think that's helpful. But I think quite honestly, until we get a new city manager in place, I think right now we're just trying to keep the lights on
Tread
and
water.
and keep
Absolutely.
things running and pay our employees and, kind of keep people. I mean, and that's just me. That's just my opinion. That's just my sense. So I'm not trying to dismiss that. I just think we're we're trying to get a lot done right now.
Yeah, and that's very fair, and we hopefully you didn't feel attacked by that. Yeah.
I do not feel attacked at all. I just think, I think it's a fair comment.
Mhm.
And just think, and I hate to say, let's kick it down the road because I know that we've kicked a lot of things down the road, but I just don't see how we can really address it effectively right now.
Right. And Janet, I will pile on just a little bit to what Sheila said. And we have been, I know Cynthia's been part of this, we have been asking for a calendar for our meetings that
Mhm.
allow us time to review things intelligently, to make recommendations, and then for those recommendations to be reflected in your subsequent agendas. That has not happened for the last year. So the next city manager, he or she is going to have, one of the KPIs in my mind should be, how do they manage the commission's input to city council?
I think that's a very valid point.
Fair enough. Thank you. Appreciate it. John, thank you so very much. And you helped us understand what the fee schedules should be and can be. And we look forward. My suspicion is, and one of the things that we didn't do, Janet, I don't know how we're going to I'll assign this to someone. Ted's sitting still, so I'm going to shoot at him. Okay. This feels like it should be something that should live in Ted's shop, but I will defer to the judgment of our city council and where that should sit. But I think there should be one person responsible for, or one department responsible. Responsible for managing the review,
Okay,
managing the city manager's review of the review,
yep.
and then bringing that back to city council. And since we don't have a city manager in the moment, I don't think it's appropriate to ask our interim city managers to do that.
No, but it might be a management services.
Could be.
I
Could
think
be.
I think that's a lot of work to.
That seems like it falls into the city
Well,
clerk.
I'll plant the seed with you, Janet. You need to take that back to city council. with
Yeah,
that
okay,
list.
thank you. I will, yes, I will mention that. I'll pull this item from consent tomorrow and we'll have a discussion about this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. 1 second here. We're just going to set something up so that the people on Zoom can see the schedules.
John, while you're doing that, of the 4 packets that we had in the 27th, which one are these for? That's the one I didn't get.
But the revenue schedule should be in one of these. It's the revenue schedule.
I have to loan you. Put it in the middle. Thank you.
I think it's the same. No, because I think we had the updated revenue schedules that came in for this item. We're really looking at the revenue schedules.
Just revenue. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm Cynthia, you and Janet can share.
No, I'm okay with what, I'm okay with this, what I have. I've got my Excel sheets, don't worry.
What's on screen right now, John?
We don't have, I don't have anything else.
What's on-
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Great.
Okay, so first I'm just gonna discuss it first, very high level, and then we're gonna go into specifics on here. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is this is just the high level. So this is all the general fund revenues, and we're compressing it down into these categories. So we have things for property tax, assessments, sales tax, utility users tax, license permits, fines, forfeitures, use of the money, other agency, current services, and all other revenues, which is obviously a catch-all. One of the things as we go through the process, so there's certain revenues that I'm going to speak to directly. There are other revenue streams where I have the department heads here, and they're related for charges for services. And so the purpose of going through this exercise is just simply to talk about the methodologies that were used for developing revenues on there. So with that said, I'm going to shift over to the details. So the first one we're going to talk about is the property tax line. Let's see.
John, I think the property tax one is the most clear cut. That's the straight up HDL. And I don't think anyone's had questions on property tax.
And that is correct. So So anyways, but I want to go through this kind of systematically. I can go through that quickly if you prefer, if the
Yeah,
commission
I
prefers.
think the only line item that I would ask, which would be the motor vehicle and lieu adjustment. Aside from that, everything else is fairly consistent. And I said, one of my biggest challenges with the revenues is that we have two independent consultants who provided revenue projections that were significantly lower than the projections here without having any additional information provided to us as far as to substantiate the higher revenue numbers. And by that, I mean, I don't mean Excel spreadsheets. I actually mean like the general ledger, for instance,
Mhm.
or reports that are coming from the third parties to have that understanding. So I think that's where I'm stuck on this without, without having the actuals on any of this. I don't understand how to I've looked at the methodology. I'm not sure how I can support the significant difference between your projections and NHA and Statler's projections. So I'd want to actually hone in on those differences instead.
And we can, we'll definitely be touching on all of the general fund revenues. So we're not going to leave any stone unturned, with that said. As a general rule, with respect to the question of, so everything is always kind of in a flux. It's at a moment in time. So when we talk about Bill Statler, that was information that I provided him at a point in time.
So
NHA, the same thing applies at a point in time. And so, for
not
example,
so revenue, the revenue projections, they use their 5-year historical data to create the revenue projections going forward. So it's not really a matter of point in time. Again,
it is a matter of point in
well,
time.
except, so, I mean, for me, the only, I can accept that argument if actual data is provided. So if there's,
So what's
if
been-
there's data
Mhm.
provided that's from the general ledger that shows this is what we've had happen on the revenues as of now we're, 2 weeks into July, so it's 6/30, and that includes what we have as our receivables, right? So that's kind of the information that I'd want to see if your estimates, because as I look through the line items, there were areas where the estimates, and I said this before, were to the dollar of what the budget was.
Mhm.
Which,
And again, my approach for tonight is really to discuss the methodology that's employed for all of the estimates that have been developed for the 24-25 year.
so what numbers did you use to just develop your estimates? I'm just,
So, well,
straight
let's-
up, like, what
Sure.
period numbers did you use? And then what did you add to that?
Sure. So let's start with the property tax. The property tax, we utilize HDL. HDL is a consulting firm. They're probably the largest firm of its type. They have very sophisticated models that they use in their when they're determining estimates and projections on property tax. Now, HDL is also known for being very conservative. So one of the things I want to point out in here is because last year, Councilmember Braun had this question related to property tax, and it's like, how could the number jump so high was the question. At the time, I had to go back and research it. I didn't have the answer off the top of my head. And when I went back and looked at it, and so I'm going to use this as an example of this. So the original budget that was developed in 22-23, had the property taxes at this 1.8 or $18.1 million figure. And so when I was developing, sorry about that, when I was developing, the 23-24 budget, and I'm also coming up with projections for the rest of that particular year, one of the things I noted was that the revenues that were budgeted that year were materially understated. And so because of that, if you look here, so here in column P, this is what the budget was when I went through and looked at my projections. And again, I'm using HDL because for property tax and sales tax, they're very, very good. And so I came back with fairly significant, higher numbers here. And again, HDL is conservative. So in actuality, we were even several $100,000 higher than that, which is what I expect with them because they're going to be conservative. They don't want to overstate revenues, and neither does any finance director worth their salt on there. And so when we're looking at these things, there has been inconsistencies in the past. And obviously we're trying to clean these up and keep these, in a much more consistent going forward in a standard approach. So, so the question, Vice Chair, that you're asking is absolutely valid. When you're seeing these changes in there, why are we seeing some of these jumps? Now, again, so right now, the estimates that we had for all of the property taxes really came from HDL. And I'm just going to show you kind of just a quick snapshot of one, just purely for demonstration purposes. So you'll see in here, the top three here, the property tax, current secured, the unsecured, and the residual from the successor agency. So when I'm going through on these things here, in addition to also the motor vehicle in lieu of property tax. So when I get on a, it's not, I don't get them on a quarterly basis. It's not that periodic, but I get them probably every 4 months or so. I get updates from HDL, and I'm constantly looking at these to see how are we tracking, because property tax and sales tax is such a huge material component of our revenue streams. And so I'm always looking at those things. So for example, in mid-year, you'll see sales tax where I adjust the sales tax downwards by about 260,000. But my point in this is, so I'm looking at their numbers here. And so this is just one of their schedules that they have. And so this is for the 24-25 year here. And you'll see that they're estimating, the 15,268,000, the 483 for the unsecured, and the unitary tax of 146. And so you'll see in here, those are my basis for those numbers. And the same thing applies here as well. Now, the same thing applies with the sales tax. The HDL provides two things. So they provide, an estimate of where they think they're going to be for 24, 25, but then they also give me a separate schedule, what they think for the next 3 years, just so that I can see trends. And so the trend has been for 24, 25, so 23, 24 softened a bit. They're expecting about, for sales tax, for example, about a 2.5% growth from this adjusted number for 24, 25 on there. And then they're going back to a more what I call normalcy state, which is around 3% growth on sales tax. Now, so I'm using those for property tax, the special taxes and the sales taxes. Now, when it comes to, for example, on the utility user tax, what I do is I really I'm just doing an analysis on here, and it's based on my years of experience with this. And so, for example, I'm just going to talk about the,
See the utility users.
John, I have a general question about the utility users tax.
yes.
NHA in their projection
Mhm.
used 5% for their assumption,
Mhm.
and that was down from 6.3% that was used in February.
Yes.
And I've noticed that we've got a 5.76% increase
Yes.
for the proposed over the estimated.
Yes.
Well,
And
I-
that's
I-
probably something that I just didn't realize when I was speaking
Cynthia,
with them.
I think the NHA projections were for next year because he used the ones that they brought back to us last time was as a reset. So actually,
Using this budget.
no, but they used it as a reset. Their projection was for the following year. And that
Yeah,
was
Vice
actually one of my
Chair
issues
Rossi,
that I had.
correct.
What I had with the NHA presentation was it wasn't giving projections for this year. So the projections for utility users tax was 6.3%.
For 25, 26.
For 25, 20, no, 6.3% for 24, 25, not 5%. 5% is what they gave us the last meeting, but that was for 25, 26.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, that was my problem with the NHA.
Oh.
That they came back and they did a reset for, and they were giving us the numbers for now, next year, based off of this year's budget.
Oh.
That was why that was why I was frustrated. Correct. Correct. So what they had actually is that, 6.3% for was their assumption for this year. And this budget, the proposed versus adopted for utility users tax is 9%. The proposed versus last year's adopted budget, which was used as the basis for NHA. Yeah, so that's this current budget that's before us. No, not when they did it when they brought the report to us in February. Yeah. So that was 6.3. So their 6.3 compared to what we have here is a 9% increase on utility users tax. So they were assuming 6.3 and this model uses 9%.
So
And one of the areas that the change is an odd one, but it's the utility tax for gas is the one that has a significant increase. So I wasn't sure if there was any basis for believing that the utility users for gas would go up. I know 22, 23, but that was a high spike year in energy. So like just energy expenses for gas in particular, a lot of homeowners felt that property owners. A lot of residents.
So with respect to the, I'm sorry, with respect to the UUT, so just kind of looking at this, so here are 5 years of actuals in here. What I did over here is in my methodology, I'm looking at the growth rates, if you will, from year to year, the change in here, and then the average. And so for example, in here, I'm just gonna start with the first one, the water. The actuals for last year were 809,000. I'm increasing them marginally, 2%, basically $20,000 in there where the average was 6%. The one that's the largest one that's driving on the utility is the electric in there. And so, and basically last year the actuals were just under 2,080,000, and I'm estimating 2.3 million for 24-25, which is a 12% increase. And when I looked at the averages on there, the averages were 15%. So again, I'm still being conservative with my methodologies with this. Then we look at gas as well. And so gas, just looking at this and looking at the averages in here, the averages, were 16%. But again, I'm kind of looking at this and I'm kind of reality checking it, based on my years of experience with this. And even with that 16%, I'm still kind of limiting this to really 7%. I'm always going to be on the conservative side. I do not want to overstate revenues.
So it's interesting though, because when my calculation on that is a 44% for your utility gas. So when you look at your proposed versus what was adopted last year, it's actually was a 44% increase that's calculated in there.
So I'm basing this on actuals. I'm always basing all of my.
I understand. I
information.
understand. I'm also
Okay.
looking, I'm just doing a comparison
Sure.
right here and saying what I see here, the 925, the proposed compared to what you had budgeted and adopted was, it's a 44% increase from what was adopted from last year. So I understand that you're saying part of that is you're saying the estimates were 860,000.
Yes, and a lot of times, because you can have this, again, everything is an estimate. So whenever I have actuals are always going for me as I'm going through and estimating revenues, actuals are always going to supersede any
Well, at
any
the-
prior year budget in there because you just have volatility, you have all kinds of different dynamics.
Sure,
that are
but at
going
this time, but at this point in time, we should have the actuals for 23, 24.
No,
utility
no, no,
tax.
no,
What,
no.
what date does that come in?
I will not have actuals until very late in the year.
Okay, so for this last year's utility taxes,
Yeah, so if you're talking about fiscal year 23, 24,
correct?
I will really not have solid numbers until probably October.
Okay, so where are you basing so your revenue estimates for 23, 24 are coming from 22, 23 actuals?
So my estimates are based on, I'm looking at the 5-year. So I never just look at a single year because you have volatility and you
I-
have all kinds of different things.
I understand that, but I think the
Mhm.
issue is that there was a spike in gas in particular
Mhm,
in
yes.
22, 23.
Yes.
So again, I'm going to NHA
Mhm,
and look, the difference.
mhm.
I mean, I see you used a 44% number, it's a 44% higher number than what you had as the adopted budget in 23, 24. So it was a 44% growth rate.
Mhm.
So, and then we go down and look at utility users tax as a line item, it's a 9% versus 6.31%.
Yes.
We can go through the arguments over it,
Mhm.
but without having anything to substantiate it, it's hard for me to accept. And these are,
And I understand that. And so all I'm here to really address is methodology
right,
in of itself.
right. So can I pop down? I mean, because that's on.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Apologize.
I mean, similarly, that happens again in the other taxes where, you had an 11% growth between what was adopted and what's proposed. And then you have versus NHA had a 6.48%. So that's another area where you're estimating or you're proposing something higher than what they had estimated in their projections. But what I actually want to get down to is interest income. So what is that under? That's under use of money and property?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
So, yeah, because I want to go systematically all through this. We can obviously we'll touch interest as well, but I want to go very systematically through all of the revenue categories, if you will.
So John,
So-
on the chart that you just flipped off of, so
Sure.
it looks to me like you're using trend lines.
On certain things, yes. Other things, I'm using other sources. So it really depends on the nature of the revenue. For example, in our special revenues, we have gas tax, we have Measure R, we have Measure M, we have SB1. So we have all these other revenue streams, right? And so on those, for example, I go to different agencies. So for example, with those revenues I just mentioned, Metro MTA provides estimates. I reach out to them. I get the estimates of what they think our allocations are going to be. And so gas tax, I reach out to the state legislative analyst office where they publish the gas tax and a few other special revenues as well. And those sources, over time, they update their estimates. So if there is like a major swing, like for example, I've had this several years ago with gas tax, where the gas revenues really dropped materially. And so the state legislative office sent out blanket emails out saying, hey, we want everyone to be aware of this. Our revenue estimates are lowering significantly. Please look at your budgets and your finances and adjust accordingly, for example. So
So I assume you have some form of documentation though on all of these items, correct?
yes, yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
that's part of what would help me is seeing the documentation that's there.
Sure.
Because there's a like, let's look at what's in the Excel sheet. There's a
Right.
deviation from what we're seeing elsewhere, but there's no supporting documentation. And
Right.
I'm just in that trust but verify
Okay.
sort of mindset.
Sure.
Because what we're talking about again is a $700 to $900,000 difference, not
Right.
specifically, not, and look, some of these areas and sections where I don't have a problem with, it's fine, it makes sense. It's other areas that I see that it like, doesn't make sense. And it's not following in line with the other things, data that we're looking at. So that's why I'm like, I understand wanting to go through each methodology, but I'm kind of a little bit more, can we look at the numbers that don't make sense? Versus each one, like like your licenses and permits,
So, and so,
so like, no,
Yeah.
I'm saying license and permits, you said 7%, they said 6.3, fine. That's
Yeah.
fine, right? And I look the same, like, okay, fines and forfeitures. There's a 0% on yours, the NHA said 0%, okay, makes sense. So those type of things, I don't want to like go and
yes,
pick at. It's
Yes.
more when I see something that's a little bit abnormality.
yes.
So that's my, just
So-
to.
So I'd like to bring us back to Jenny. You started to ask a question. You
Okay,
asked about,
I was just trying to finish up the methodology. So it sounds like, John, there's trend analysis, and then there's some reach outs to various governmental agencies from whom we get revenues.
Yes.
And so that's kind of your due diligence process.
Yes. So there's that aspect. Then there's also from the departments, they're the subject matter experts in their area, like I'll just say, community development for, building fees, plan check fees, things of that. And so I get estimates from them. I get estimates from Public Works on certain projects. And with that, for example, with respect to CIP, there's these different funding sources on there. So like, for example, when I reach out to these agencies, MTA for Measure M, Measure R, gas tax, a lot of those funds are funding CIP related projects. So I'm always looking at those to make certain that there is enough funding available to support something.
Right.
And particularly 1 year you may have revenue and for example, I'm just going to use SB1, you may have revenue of 700,000, but when you look at the funding, oh, well, we're funding, $2 million. Well, that's because it's been built up over time, the fund balance. And so now we're going to take a bigger hit.
Right.
But-
It sounds like, John, you have these in work papers or some kind of,
Yeah.
have
I
like,
have this all
at a
over.
conference with so-and-so at Metro, and
Yeah.
it's somewhere in your work paper.
And I'd love to see it. So I think in the categories that there's a deviation from the other two data points that we have, I'd love to just see the supporting documentation for it. Because again, we're just talking about
Sure,
700
sure. No, absolutely. And some of the things are just simply analysis and based on my experience, what I expect to happen.
Fine. And I do think, one thing that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's part of future budgeting that I would highly recommend is that we move to a quarterly basis on the budgeting because we don't have even revenue streams. Our expenditures tend to be a little bit more even because, salaries are even, but the revenue streams aren't even. So it makes it very hard on these summary reports to understand. So I'd love to see us actually having to quarter so we're understanding how we're doing to quarter. Right. Anyway.
No,
thanks.
absolutely. And some of that, obviously is because of our staffing condition right now on there. And I don't want to just run numbers at a point in time. For example, I'm not going to run numbers right now as of June 30 because I know they're highly inaccurate right now because we haven't done all of our accounting. We haven't done our accruals. If we have reclassifications, there's a lot of things that go into the numbers. And really until we're done with those processes and I have confidence that we've captured everything, I don't want to publish financial statements.
So John, I think, look, I understand that, but I would actually argue that's why you should go more conservative on your revenue projections. So that's where I would say it's much better to come in with a surprise, yay, we did much better in revenues than we expected, than to say, oops, we didn't have all the numbers sorted out. So that's where I'd
Right.
push for more conservative numbers. I have a couple very specific questions.
Jenna, was your question
Sorry.
answered? You're done. Okay. And John, we understand your focus on methodology, but I heard Commissioner Rossi asking you to drop down and to take a look at specifics.
Yes, and by saying that, I'm saying that a couple, those categories that I'm skipping over, I'm fine with. So
Okay.
if that helps you, licenses and permits, we're good. Fines and forfeitures, we're good. Okay, so I'm not asking for the methodology on that.
So Cynthia, are you good with the number? So we're skipping down. Where are you taking us to? Commissioner?
I am taking you under it's not fines and forfeitures, it's just right under that item though.
Use of
So
money.
use of money and property. And the first line item is interest income.
So can you take us to use of,
It's 4,800.
So, so that is in this budget document here.
This
It is the first page of the revenues, which is page 16. It's not really showing up on these prints. I think the print range got cut off or whatever. It's towards the bottom of the first page on there. Well, unfortunately, I think the page number, the pagination got cut off in the prints. Let me walk over because
fines and forfeitures?
So
Oh.
it's right here.
Use of money's over here.
Yes,
so
it's right here.
this could be like page 16, 17.
It's okay. It's just that.
So I
it's
apologize
that-
for
it's
that.
that item.
This is
It's a problem.
all the way to, at the end of it, you'll get the three. So apologize for that.
Okay. So you've asked us to drop down the use of money.
Right,
correct?
so use of money, interest income. Correct? So,
Interesting, cannot find it.
it's down here.
Interest income, got it. Fair enough.
Okay. So it's actually those three lines that I have a question about. So in the 2022-23 actuals, it was about 423,000. In last year's budget, the adopted budget was for 950, which was a significant increase over what had happened previously. And it looks like the estimated is less. So one, I'm trying to understand what happened with that one, how it was so far off the budget. But then, because that's a material difference. The other part of it that, two line items drop off in both last year's budget and then this year's budget, which is this gains, loss, investment, unrealized gain, loss. And those, in the past, had some significant there were negative impacts to the budget. So I'm trying to understand what happened in both our interest income side and then the gains, loss investments.
Sure. So with respect to the interest income, so originally, if you're looking at the 22-23 actuals of 423, and then you see the significant increase in the 23-24.
In the budget.
Yes, in the budget. My finance manager at that time, we increased our cash and investments. We almost doubled them. And so because of that, and with the higher interest rates, Albert at the time estimated significant increases in interest income. With that, what I've done, and the reason why you're seeing the significant lower number for the projection for that year, as well as and I'm keeping it pretty much identical for the 24-25 is, so I ran some numbers and I ran numbers through March and I just simply prorated those. And I took a more conservative approach based on actuals that I'm seeing. So whenever I have reliable actuals, I'm always going to be looking at them over anything else, regardless of the outcome of it. And so the reason why you're seeing it going from 950 to 658 is when I looked at the numbers through March and then I prorated that out for the rest of the year, it was significantly lower, as you can see with these numbers. So with respect to the gains and losses and the unrealized gains and losses, we will never budget for those. We will never budget for those.
I
So what
don't-
you're seeing in here are just the actuals for the years 21, 22, and 23.
Okay, so then what were the estimates for 23-24 for the gains and losses? 'Cause it obviously
I am not estimating the gains and losses.
So that's a problem then, because look, you have
Mhm.
in here, in the actuals for 22-23, you
Mhm.
have the $350,000 of losses, right? So which impacts your bottom line on your revenues. The year before, you had over a 1.1 million, right? So that there again, I call on being actually more conservative in your revenue projections. If you're not going to call out the possibilities of gains and losses, even to provide an estimate for what's happened this year, then like I think it's actually just getting irresponsible then.
No, so the reason for that is, so these numbers that you're seeing in here is because of GASB 31, Government Accounting Standards Board Pronouncement 31, to report unrealized gains and losses. So these are not realized. These are unrealized. These are non-cash transactions, and I do not budget for non-cash transactions. And that is the reason why that's why I
When
would
we're
never do that.
looking at the revenue sums over a course of years, they're included as part of those numbers.
For GASB 31, yes. For financial reporting purposes, they are.
Okay, so then when we look at the numbers that we're putting together for this year, we need to actually be considering that too, because it does.
I don't agree with that.
So I'm sorry. Can I try to jump in and understand this? So on this is, you know how FASB changed this a while ago, right? That you have to note in your financial statements, sort of where you kind of all your investments.
Yes.
So this is an unrealized gain or loss. So John, is this only in here for the ACFR? And
Yes.
so so you're not, because the budget is just cash based
Yes.
and
It's
this
your
is
spending plan.
and this is just an accrual.
Yes.
And so you'll report this in your ACFR, but because we're cash based. So I'm not,
And nowhere else.
well, that's the question, is why is it in here?
Then
Because
why-
it's probably when you print it out, it's a line
Then-
item.
then why did- Yeah, I mean, how are we supposed to do the fund analysis if that's the case? That makes absolutely no sense. That speaks double speak.
Well, so the question then is, what are the realized gains and losses the year? I think that's the cash basis question, is what are the realized gains and losses?
And
So I guess the gain loss on investment is the correct line to be looking at, because that's actual and that's cash. But the unrealized gains and losses is just an accrual. Yep.
And to answer your question, Councilmember Braun, I do this because I'm looking at all of the general ledger accounts for integrity. I want to make certain that I've accounted for everything. And so I do that as a matter of course in my process and my methods.
But if it doesn't belong in the budget, then why is it in the budget? I guess that's my question. If you're not going to budget for it, why do you have those line items in
Yeah,
here?
it just makes it a little bit more confusing, John. That's what I hear Commissioner Ross is saying.
Especially when it comes
Yeah.
to the summary data.
And
Then how are you
Yeah,
comparing?
it's
2022,
consistency with prior
23?
years.
Huh?
It's consistency with prior years.
Well, but I think that's the challenge. So, you're not being consistent with prior years. If you,
How so?
because prior years had the number in there. So like,
We're always on these schedules, we always show actuals for so many years in these schedules. We always do.
but the negative numbers here
Yes.
feed into the bottom line on your general fund revenues.
Right.
From a financial
So-
reporting standpoint, yes.
Not just in the budget, like when you're looking at the budget, you're comparing year after year, you say, okay, we made 37.9 one year, then 38 the next year. Like it's not just about the budgeting, it's actually how it impacts your bottom line on the revenues, like, it's in the budget. So it's not just financial reporting. So we're not talking ACFR here, we're talking about the budget. So if it was consistency, I don't understand what you're saying, quite honestly.
Well, so a question I might have is, John, so historically, have we budgeted for a gain or a loss from investments? So these numbers that are in these line items,
That's why you only see it in the actual columns.
got,
I,
Yeah.
I f- I feel like I would need to verify that. I mean, that's something that could be said, but I'd need to verify that.
So John, when I read the total amount under use of money and property estimated for 23-24, that does not include any gains or losses on investment.
That is correct.
Okay. So since we don't know that, how did you get to the next number, which is the proposed?
So I'm not, I'm not proposing anything on gains or losses or unrealized gains or losses. I'm not including anything in there.
So is the
Zero.
use of money and property just the interest that we're earning on our cash?
Actually, use of money and property is two things. So there's interest is a component of it, but it's a rental property. If we're renting out,
It's these,
facilities or things of that nature as well.
sorry.
So you'll see in there, you'll see a lot of rental of different properties and assets that the city has and, for fees, if you will.
It looks, but the substantial pieces look to be the interest income and the stables lease. Those are the
Yeah,
material
mhm,
items.
yeah.
I think they get rent, and Lucy, don't they get a rent credit because they're doing some capital improvements on the courts? I think that might be why.
Good evening. Yes, that is correct. We do get about $4,200 in rent from them, but that is a rent credit because of the capital improvement projects that the operator is doing currently.
Yeah, that's fine.
Helpful. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I got it. So is that listed in the narrative anywhere? Because, looking again, being able to understand what's happening over time, we had a sudden drop in the rental revenues. So obviously there's a good reason
Yeah.
for it, but I think it's something to make sure that it has to be noted in the budget documents.
The short answer is no. We don't really have anything in the narratives related to that type of whatever. I don't even want to call it event, but that type of an activity. The only place really when we're going through at the end of the year, in other words, when we have all final numbers, the numbers aren't going to change, and we go through and then we do an analysis for the audit where we're comparing the budget.
It needs
budget
to be in the budget
actuals.
narrative. Let me be shorter. It needs to be in the budget narrative. So the fact that, normally we're used to seeing rentals at a rate of 108,000 or 91,000 and then drops to 52,000, but it's because it's a short-term issue. And it's an offset. It needs to be something that's noted in the budget narrative. So I understand, and this is where maybe a lot of our butting of heads comes from. Looking at it from the perspective of someone who's deep in the numbers and the finances. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the public, and the public needs to be able to understand it just as well. And if it's not like, oh, well, I understand you might have the answers there, but it's making sure that that information's there so people can follow it over time. And understand.
So I think, Vice Chair Rossi, for example, since the revenues are so critical, maybe the answer, so for example, it might just be two bullet, for the future. Well, a couple of bullet points under each of these categories, like what swung things.
No, it's supposed to be part of the narrative that they provide to the council, because how do you analyze a budget without?
Well,
that?
that's what I'm
Yeah, yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Oh,
But
like
no,
bullet points, like saying,
right, what
okay,
are notable changes?
yeah, notable changes, like, okay, rent for the tennis courts went down because we're giving rent credits.
Right.
Interest is going to be stable because we just don't think there's going to be interest rate cuts, which there actually are going to be interest rate cuts, but those kinds of things.
Right.
For each category of revenue.
Right. I mean, the budget's supposed to have a full several pages of narrative on the
Yep.
front, the management report, but
Yep.
which we haven't seen to this point, but that's
Yeah.
the hard part we're taking a look. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's right, which is, I think, why but we're getting this now, but I think for the future, we need
Right.
that kind of narrative with just sort of significant increases, decreases, and why.
Right. So like rental batting cages also suddenly they went to zero. I mean, weren't
Similar.
huge before.
Yes, for the batting cages right now, they are doing capital improvements. So there is rent credit for X amount of years.
Okay.
And once that is done, then we will be collecting the revenue for the agreement that we have with the operator.
Okay. Perfect. That helps. So like, yes, that needs a bullet point.
Yeah, right.
That these are the things that are happening. So these are temporary reductions.
Yeah, so it would have been helpful if we had a narrative that said, we renewed the lease for the batting cages and we renewed the lease for the tennis courts, but that the operators are getting rent credits for some capital improvements they're making.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So for the
Um,
future, John,
Or
Sure.
this, for this budget,
or this budget,
just-
right?
We just need some bullet point narratives. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, an essay.
Yeah,
but just
yeah.
to know that what's happening in it.
Yep.
Because when you look at it from the outside, because we have to make sure that this document's something that is readable to the public. I also now going to revenue from other agencies. Under grants for police, we have a jump from 21,500 to 236 without, so curious what that is. I'm assuming, no, actually, I have no idea. I won't assume anything.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I
So
apologize.
under revenue from other agencies,
Mhm.
grants police.
Right.
So I was just curious what that is and if it's in the right place.
So sometimes with these grants, there's timing issues where it's not realized in 1 year. And so we know we're going to have so certain grants, they're reimbursement basis, right? And so we don't recognize revenue and or seek reimbursement for a cost until we've incurred all of those costs. So that sometimes there's timing issues related to that. And with this is one of these cases where this program, they had it for 23, 24, but it wasn't going to be materialized until 24, 25. But I can have the police chief speak at greater length on that if you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can look at mine, Janet.
It's a carryover. And that is correct. It's a carryover. And that looks like it's our COPS grant, which is we get every year. It's a minimum of typically about 100,000. It's based on population. And so what happens is a lot of times we'll get funding for a specific program. For instance, our flock cameras, we got COPS grant money for that. Same with UWASI. Police departments are pretty limited in the number of grants we get. Typically, it's either COPS grants, it's OTS grants, or UWASI, which is a Homeland Security grant. So in any of those programs, we get them. They're usually we put in for them. They're a couple years delayed. In a couple of the cases, for instance, we have a $130,000 grant we got from UWASI for this year, which was going to be used for a regional project between Alhambra and Monterey Park. Biden administration changed what we were allowed to purchase, so that money now has to be repurposed. So it was carried over. So now we have to find a new project and go through the approval process. We have the money. We just need to find a new program or new project to spend that money.
I guess I'm asking more why it's in the general fund revenues versus a special revenue fund, because it looks like in past years, the number for this line item was significantly lower. It was, 6,000, 41,000, 15,000, 21,000. And all of a sudden it jumps up to 236,000 and the proposed is also 236,000. So I'm a little bit confused. Is the total number 236,000 for each year?
And that would be something that
Yeah. Yeah, so I totally understand the grants. I'm just trying to understand if it's in the right place.
Sure.
And also what the total is.
In general, to speak to that, Vice Chair, there are some grants that are just naturally, they flow into the general fund. And there are others, depending on the size of the grant, where they have their own fund.
Now, if it
so-
flows into the general fund, though, that no longer is being used for a specific purpose, it can be used for whatever purpose, correct? So,
Well, it depends on the nature of the grant. So I can't say a blanket statement like that. It really is grant specific. So for example, asset seizure, because of the materiality of it, we create our own fund.
So I understand that, but this specific, we have the number 236,385, both is estimated for being in this year. And
Yes.
then it's also proposed for next year. So I guess I'm trying to understand, is that one grant? Is it the exact same grant twice? Like that's, was it something split? Was it a $500,000 grant that is now split over 2 years? Like that's,
Right. I can't answer that off the top of my head. I
so
can
let's
look
asterisk
into
that.
And so yeah, I'll definitely look into that. And it can be accumulative. You know, for example, there's one type of grant called an AB 109 grant
Yep.
that most cities get for police services. And a lot of times that builds up over multiple years. You know, you normally get about some agents I've seen, you know, over about $110,000 per year, but they may get 2 or 3 of them in 1 year.
Sure, sure. It's just a deviation from the norm, so that's why I'm calling it out. I mean, look, my questions here are actually just about things that I see as unusual. So I have questions and maybe right? Uh, and then the fire interagency support, I see the revenues were projected or adopted budget was 300,000. It was only 60,000 this year and it's proposed again for 300,000. Was there something that occurred there?
Give me 1 second, I apologize.
No problem.
I just want to make a note here. Let's see. So with respect to the fire interagency support reimbursement, so this here we have, there's actually 2 parts to this. So normally we have this interagency support reimbursement. So if we don't incur the cost, we don't receive the reimbursement. It's almost a neutral position. So there's costs that mirror this dollar figure. And so the fire chief, Paul Riddle, you know, he's works with uh, San Marino, sorry. And they have these reimbursement agreements. And so if we have incidents where we're providing services for them, whatever that cost is, we get reimbursed for those. His estimate for that is that he's expecting about $300,000 of cost. And so we're just simply mirroring the reimbursement side of that.
So if,
And you can see,
so if the
I'm sorry.
costs of, so in that case, like looking forward, the revenues would go down by the same amount as the expenditures.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
okay.
And that $300,000 figure comes from the chief of fire department, right?
That is correct.
Perfect.
Because he's negotiating these different agreements with these other agencies where they have these interagency agreements.
Okay. I have a question, Cynthia, you don't spend any time, I know I'm loud. So on planning fees, so it went from 230 to 6,300 was what was the budget and it dropped to 145. Is there a reason for that drop?
Let me have Community Development Director Angelica Frosto Lupo speak to that.
Good evening,
Sure.
Finance Commission. Sorry, Vice Chair, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, so in the budget for planning fees, it was, the planning fees typically were in the 200,000 range, 263 in 2022-23 actuals, 300,000 adopted, and it dropped down to 145. And it's proposed for 145 again this year. So I was curious, where what's happened there. So part of reviewing the revenues is also asking some questions of what happened. You know,
Right.
sometimes in the good, sometimes bad, you know?
Of course, thank you. So we did anticipate there were about a handful of projects that had been entitled a few years ago, and we thought that those projects were going to spur other development. Development spurs development, and actually, what happened seems that developers took a kind of step back and were waiting for the new downtown specific plan.
Mhm.
And so we did reduce the number to 145,000.
Angelica, when do the developers pay the fee
For the planning, when
for-
they,
that is in this number? When do they actually pay the fee that would be included in this number?
when they submit their applications, so as they're going through the entitlement process, and again, so we had really anticipated that we were with some of the projects that had already been entitled,
Yep.
that it was going to spur more development.
Okay,
Typically, that's what we see. That's not what happened, and I think probably, again, the development community was watching what was happening with the housing element and the downtown specific plan.
right, and interest rates are not helping.
Additionally, we look at the economic indicators. Yes, absolutely.
And then, so are the plan check fees separate? So is planning fees more related to developers and then plan check?
Is building, that's correct. So for example, the planning fees would be the CUPs, the development applications, the variances, hillside development permits. Those
Okay.
are the planning fees. And then plan check is when contractors, property owners submit for building plan check. So once a
Okay.
project has been approved through planning, then they move into the building side.
So then our residential existing has stayed fairly stable, but it was more the developers who are holding off between interest rates and
Yeah.
waiting
Yeah.
for the house. element.
Right, they're not submitting the number of applications that you thought you'd see.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Want me to keep asking questions? All right, got two more. On the general fund side. The filming, both under police services and fire department. They took significant hits this last year, and you've kind of have them projected to jump back up to earlier levels or close to. And I just wanted to see if there are any indicators that was going to happen because hi. Because, I just have concerns of continued strikes.
I can't speak specifically to police and fire, but what happened this past year are the two strikes that
Mhm.
we had not anticipated. So I know just generally speaking, in terms of filming permits, that's what caused the numbers to reduce. However, we are seeing that the filming is back up, and so you'll notice that the numbers are for the
Okay.
next year.
Okay, good. Because I was hearing kind of from people and residents who are in the industry that they were continuing to feel the hit from the strikes. So, but if you have indicators that are showing
This-
that it's ticking back up, that's
Yeah, this last month of June was very good, almost to the norm.
okay.
But absolutely, it was a slower recovery than I think anticipated.
Okay.
You have
That's not all.
Cynthia, any questions? So,
On the general fund, I have one more weird question.
okay,
So,
Okay.
no, so I mean, this is just general fund side, but on the general fund credit card transaction fees, there was a significant jump from 9,000 to 90,000.
that's okay. No, but
So this goes under other revenues.
And John, is that because I think the city, Stephanie has the answer.
So our credit card transaction fees went from a 0.25% return to a full recovery for our credit card fees. That way the city wasn't have to pay out every single credit card transaction fee that there is. We were Before only recovering 0.25%, now we recover fully.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Which is like
perfect.
3% or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I assume also there's probably more movement towards credit card anyway and like Venmo and things.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And then going into the non-general fund.
wait a minute.
Okay.
Cynthia?
On
This
page 3.
general fund?
Yeah, general fund. And,
Give me one moment.
yeah,
Okay.
fund balances,
Uh-huh.
not just, no, yeah, fund balances.
We'll come back to
Yeah. So, Fund 214 has a deficit beginning balance, then has a transfer out. So it has a larger ending deficit. How can you have a transfer out if there's no money in the fund? I don't understand that.
No, it's a very good question on there. I'm actually going to have Ted Gerber speak to that on there. I think, let's see here.
There's a similar question for the Mission Meridian Public Garage, except that it's a year-end expenditure with no revenues.
So the question is the Rogan grant, HR 5394, the transfer out from a negative balance and then
And then the Mission Meridian Public Garage has a negative beginning balance, no revenues and expenses.
Yeah,
that show up.
good evening again, commissioners. So, like many of the special funds that you see negative balances for, there's still some work to do to resolve what exactly that discrepancy is. On 214 specifically, that is related to one project, one transportation project, the Rogan project, which is an improvement of the traffic signal infrastructure along Fair Oaks Avenue. We were very close to losing that money over the last couple of years because it's actually been, the city had access to it for about 20 years or so. And if we didn't start spending it, we would lose it. And that's a good like $9-10 million total funding. And so the reason you see the transfer out is because we started the project to get the funding expended. So we need to we need to show the way that we've arranged the capital improvement program is it's on a transfer basis. So we're showing transfers out of that fund so that we can actually pay the contractor and start spending that money at a reimbursable rate. So the Rogan money we get for there's 88.53% that feds will cover of the project cost. So there's about 90% they cover and 10% we cover. So I'm getting to the point here. The city was charging expenditures against that fund previously. We don't exactly know what the circumstances that were, which caused the negative balance. So we need to go back and reconcile what happened with that fund from the original zero balance to today, while at the same time spending the money and executing the project so that we don't lose access to the grant. If that sort of makes sense.
Excuse me, Ted. So John, this is one of those funds that you inherited that had negative balances and that you have not yet cleaned up, is what I hear Ted telling us.
That is correct.
Okay, so thank you. And Ted, this is a bookkeeping entry to ensure that when we do go back and clean it up, we'll at least be able to account for the last couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And we need to do that anyway, because, every invoice that we send to Caltrans to get reimbursed for, we have a running balance with the project costs and what they're covering. And eventually that has to align with what our internal fund balance is. And at the moment it does not.
Yeah, how far does this go back, Ted? When you said we've had it for 20 years, you just scared me.
Basically this money, it was originally appropriated, it was originally intended for the 110 interchange ramp modification. The city decided to change that around 2020, 2021. And decided to develop it into this other type of Fair Oaks project. And then it sat there for a couple of years until we started the project just this last year.
Thank you.
Now, as far as the balance issue, I don't know how far back it goes, and that's kind of the problem. We have to basically work backwards to see how much, what expenditures, we have to work backwards to see what expenditures are related to our current effort versus what expenditures might be erroneous. And that's basically how we fix negative balances.
Please.
So Ted, is this the hook ramp money?
It's no
Right.
longer.
No longer. So, but when
Yes.
there's people out there that still refer to the hook ramp money.
They do, and the hook ramp money, we've changed to a different funding source.
So the hook ramp money is now in 214.
No, the hook ramp money is now in, I want to say it's like 240, but I don't have the funds in
Okay.
front of me. I'm trying to find them here.
Okay. So okay. But this is, so this is a different project. So,
Yes.
and the other thing I was just going to mention is, Kelly Telford from LSL, when we had our conversation yesterday, she did mention she knows there are some, and I think John knows as well, that there's work that needs to be done on these special fund balances. And so I believe they are going to help clean some of these up.
And we've been
Yes.
spending a tremendous effort on them. We've cleaned up, like 242 and 238.
Yep.
You might
Yep.
not see all of them reflected
So,
here.
so we have made progress,
Yes.
but we haven't. And so here, we needed to show the expenditure. We
Right.
knew that we were not showing revenue in there. However, we needed to show the expenditure. We have to go back and do cleanup and basically do research on it to see what was going on with it.
So to Commissioner Quade's point, it doesn't make sense on the paper,
Yes,
but
and that
we
is
know
correct.
that. We know we have to clean that up, but we had to show the expenditure to keep the money. And we did make the expenditure.
Yes.
Yes, and similarly for the Mission Meridian Garage. Now, that's not a grant program. That's, a balance of the city's contribution to an asset. There's a correlation between the property owners association of that complex. This is the garage at Mission Meridian next to the rail line.
Yeah.
And then there's also parking fees. So there's another cleanup effort related to that fund and how the revenues and expenditures are interacting with each other.
Okay, because
And-
it looked to me like that was kind of, it seems to always have very little revenue and more expenses than revenue. So it was looking like another LLMD situation.
Right.
That's
So
correct.
was it-
And it's a functional problem of how that, how we moving forward manage that asset and that program and the interaction between the revenue expenditures.
Thank you very much, Ted.
Yeah.
And this has brought up a challenge that we've been facing, Janet, for my entire time on the commission. And that is, John has had to explain, put a pin in that. That is something we inherited. That's something we need to clean up. If we could make that part of our contractual arrangement with LSL, it really would make life a whole lot easier on a go-forward basis.
No, I think they
problem.
are planning on addressing this. I think she might have seen this page.
Yes,
She made
It's-
she said, I
yes.
saw one page out of your budget and I know you need work on your special funds.
yeah.
Wonderful.
So.
Yeah.
um,
She will, they will be working under our direction, and these are the problem childs that we have to deal with. The Mission Meridian is a more difficult problem. It's not an accounting problem. The numbers are correct. We really need to figure out what to do with that asset.
Yeah, Mission
Because
Meridian
it's-
is an operational problem.
Yeah.
Not a problem. It's an operational issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. The other thing I
Is there-
wanted
is there
to,
a ti- I'll speak to Chair Giuliani's point. Is there a timeline for that getting addressed?
There was a committee
love it.
established, which
Right.
includes, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There was a committee established that includes council members, so they have met periodically. And, basically our staff interacts with the Property Owners Association. There's a lot more work to do.
Thank you. Okay, so the timeline would be during the tenure of LSL.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
and I want to respond to Commissioner Quaid on that. So in your budget document that you have between pages 31 and 37, you will see all of the CIP projects by funding source. So it reflects all of that. So on that particular project is listed on page 32. It is the uh, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's on the fifth column to the right, where you'll see the 214 Rogan, and that's where you'll see the project. And so we spell out on all of our CIP projects, all the funding sources that support the cost.
Thank you, John. So
Where does the money come from? Does it come from the general fund and then gets reimbursed?
No, not necessarily, no. So with respect to expenditures, so the city has what's referred to as pooled cash. So we have like one operating cash account, right? But then as we're incurring costs in the different funds, we allocate those from an accounting standpoint. We reflect the cash balances from a general ledger point of view per fund.
Okay.
But from an operational, it's one single pooled cash account for operations and one single account for payroll costs.
thank you. Commissioners, any other questions?
Good. I have additional questions. So, insurance reimbursement going into the insurance fund. You had estimated for this last year, well, you have estimated for this year, 800,000 and 977,000 for the insurance reimbursement. It's, Fund 103, going back to the revenue.
It's on page 18 of the document.
And you have projected the same amount. So again, whenever I see identical numbers, that's a question for me. So we should have in the actual report some information on what the expected reimbursements are.
So with respect to the insurance fund, the way that works is, so the insurance fund is a cost recovery, right? So we're always keeping that fund neutral. And so with respect to the revenues there, we get estimates. So in this case, for management services, risk management, on what they estimate that they're going to recover in the year. And so the first two line items there, that's what they expect to recover. Now, so we have, total cost. And so the differential between what they expect to recover from the insurance companies and that cost is now being allocated to the different funds and different departments as charges for services.
No, I understand that. I'm
Okay.
asking, my question is about the fact that what was estimated for recovery for this year
Mhm.
is exactly the same as what's proposed for next year.
Mhm.
On both the workers' comp and GL. So
Yes.
again, whenever I see identical numbers.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask questions.
Yes.
So why do we think that's gonna be exactly the same?
So the numbers were driven from that department and what they estimated that they're going to recover. So unfortunately, Louis Frosto got ill and he went
Okay,
home
got
this
it.
evening
Okay.
on there. But I'm happy to follow up and respond to the entire commission on that question.
Okay, so let's hop to, a general question throughout all of the rest of them is actually in the one area that I see repeated over and over again as strange is interest income. And across the board, interest income was over budgeted for this last year. Significant spikes. There's a 96.96, so it basically doubled in one of like under 210 sewer, I think. But it actually, like, I'm highlighting across the board, almost everywhere where it says interest income, it was over budgeted for. The estimates come in much closer to what the actuals were in prior years. And then the proposed is back to what the over budgeted amount was for last year. Does that
Yes,
make
so
sense?
these are-
I will
yes.
pick one
Mhm.
particular. So going back to that 210 sewer total, interest income, it was 93,000, actual 22-23. It jumped to 182,000 for the budget, so nearly doubled. But then the estimate's 101,000, and then in the proposal, it's 182,000. So I feel like we're repeating last year's over budgeting mistakes.
So the short answer is, no. I've actually reduced the overall interest income number fairly significantly from the prior year. In there, I don't have the exact number of the change, but
I'm literally
it's in
looking,
the
I'm looking at the
magnitude
light.
of 400.
I'm looking at the line item
$400,000.
right here in the budget. So one.
Oh, I understand, and that may be based on an allocation process.
You're talking about the total interest income has been reduced
Overall,
year over year.
yes, I've lowered the interest income estimate. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's like on the
That doesn't
magnitude of
make sense on that.
400,000.
That doesn't make sense on an allocation basis, because if you're allocating, basically using a consistent methodology, then that wouldn't be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
you've
so
got it up
again,
above 24, going 19 back to 24. Like this just keeps it's a pattern that's repeating across the line.
this is actually fairly consistent, because if you look, for example, we'll just use the sewer fund as an example here. So if you look at the revenues in here, they're fairly consistent, 2 million, 2.2 million. So those revenues are fairly consistent. So the allocations are going to be fairly consistent.
Right, but that's not how it works, John. That's funny, but you also, I mean, again, it comes back to the gains lost on investments. It's just it's a very strange thing, and I'd have to go back and look at previous budgets. Like, why would it be in here if you're saying that it should never be part of the budget, but you have it as part of the budget? So it doesn't make sense to me. And and see what you just said right there. Well, if you go down and look at the summary, but that's the problem, right? That's the exact problem that I'm talking about, because your summary doesn't include all of the pieces of the actuals. So if people go down and look at the summary and they go, oh,
What-
this
what
makes
page-
sense.
What
But
page
the
are you on?
details in the middle are different and moving around, like that's where the problems come in.
What's the question?
At
Yeah.
this point. I think I've lost it. I just, it's more of a statement. I think, what I'm seeing consistently in here is over budgeting. That's, and when it comes to the interest income, and it's based on what was, it was over budgeted last year. The estimates are lower, and then we went back to using the almost exact same numbers again for this year. So I think that's a larger issue, but it's across the board. I think my feeling as I go through the revenues is that there are areas and specific areas that are over budgeted, and I think have contributed to some of the difference in the revenue projections. So I go back, as I would like to see more conservative revenue projections.
So can I ask a question? So
Please.
there's an interest income component. So there's the interest income that you're putting in the general fund, but that's use of money and property, right?
Yes.
And then there's an interest income component to several of these special funds.
Yes.
Those are two separate things.
So it's the overall, what we expect to receive in interest income. And then it's the allocation of that out to the various funds based.
So it's not, that's my
Yeah.
question.
So where there's, because normally when we're doing the actual allocations, we're using cash basis. So how much cash does each fund
Yeah.
have in it? And that's our basis for our proration, whatever the interest is. And we tend to do that on a quarterly basis on there. For budgeting purposes, because I don't really have those cash numbers going out, so I'm looking at the revenues from that standpoint. And that's why I've mentioned the point about, using the sewer fund as an example. If you look at the revenues, they're fairly consistent, and so the allocations are going to be fairly consistent from a budgetary
So
standpoint.
if we added up all of the allocations for interest income in the special funds,
Yes.
just the interest income,
Mhm.
would that equal the interest income as part of the general fund that was used in the
No,
budget?
no, no. The interest income in the general fund is a component of the overall interest. So for
Okay,
example.
okay, I gotcha.
So for
So it's
example.
additive. It is
the-
additive.
Yeah, it is. And so the interest income projection is about
Okay.
1,745,000.
Okay,
and then it's being allocated across the funds.
So you allocate to general fund and then you allocate to certain of the other special.
That is
funds.
correct.
Okay, so it is at, okay, all right, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, but it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't answer the question
Yes.
why.
How it's
Well,
allocated.
Well, no, it's not only that. It doesn't answer how you have 182,000 was in the budget. It was 101,000. You decided that it was you're proposing 182,000 again. That's what it doesn't answer. It's basically, as I said, it's the exact same over budgeting. And if
Yes.
you look at it, if you look at actual from 2023, you can't look at the revenue numbers. It's not the way it works. Because if you look at the numbers before, it was 93,000 in 22, 23 with the exact same revenue total. So
So
m-
the
my,
interest
m-
income
so I,
in-
and I, you know, I actually just don't want to go through the dance on this. It's just, I think my feeling is that there are areas, and it's especially hitting in the interest income space where there's been some over budgeting that's occurring and occurred last year, and it's looks like a repeat this year. And so that's where I would caution.
So this,
How would you like it to be handled? And what would bring comfort to this group on how it should be handled?
Well, I mean, I think I've said it now several times. I feel like the revenue projections it's overstated.
So we need to reduce the revenue
Yes.
projection
Yes.
and reduce it by approximately how much, or in what formula would you like us to use in order to give John direction? Take a look at this year's actual and add some percentage.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we have, it said we have two different consultants who, huh?
We don't have this year.
Or estimated, pardon me. Okay. Estimated, thank you. Thanks for your clarification.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see on the general fund side, the projections brought down, and we can have some negotiation over it, but I'd like to see it brought down about $700,000. And in the very specific areas that comes in, I can walk through and say where I think it's overstated.
Okay.
That's like one that said NHA was $900,000, Statler was $700,000. I'd like to see it more in line with those numbers because I think that there's some over budgeting in here or, yeah, and on the special funds, I haven't spent that much time on it. I guess the question is if LSL is coming in. I mean, that's ultimately, the general fund has a more direct impact
right,
to operations. On the special funds, I'd like, you know, say noted that we know that there are problems in here, but maybe not want to hold it up to that.
So we will note the comments from the commission when we present the budget to the council.
Okay.
So I guess, I mean, from a commission standpoint, to wrap it up,
Right.
for this line item is, I said from a commission standpoint, I'm terrible at figuring out the wording on the recommendations, but basically just letting the council know that we feel like there's over projections in the revenue,
By approximately $700,000.
in the general fund, yes.
Yes, in the general.
Mhm.
Okay. So, John, when you prepare the presentation for city council, would you please note that we called that out,
Yes,
and it's not up to us to approve these numbers,
Correct.
but as we're presenting them to city council, we're calling out the fact that we believe that there's about $700,000 excess.
so absolutely.
Thank you.
And I would like to have the grants, the police grant one, I'd like to have clarification on that, if that's
Yeah.
supposed to be in the general fund or if it should be in a different area to make sure that it's preserved for use for the specific police purposes.
Well, you ended up with two questions about that.
Oh, yeah, what
One-
what is it?
Is it located in the right place?
And is it
And then sec-
236 or is
is
it
it
500?
Exactly. So what is the actual amount? So is it in the right line item? And then what is the number?
Yeah, and that would, if it's not located in the right place, that would,
Where does it belong?
no, where does it belong? But that would be part of that 700,000.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that alone would change the revenue projections. So
Mhm.
that's fine. Because I assume the cost would also, whatever costs associated with that would also be moved too.
Yes.
So again, so it'd be balanced out.
So how do we, as a commission, we're directing John, or asking John, not directing, because he doesn't report to us. We're asking John that when he presents his final revenue numbers to city council, that he makes those notations, those asterisks, and you call them out. Janet, we're going to be there on the 31st or whatever the date is. We will be there to hold John's to accountability, but you're also going to hold us to accountability.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Comments, commissioners,
This item?
on this item? Nothing else? Perfect. Janet, any other comments? Okay. Are we finished with revenue? My goodness, we're only 2.5 hours in.
You're gonna be so
Um,
fast. Let's see it.
Okay, what I'd love.
Does that mean a coffee break?
Sit down.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, you do get to sit down, John, so your knees.
I'm
get
doing,
to
I'm
rest.
doing my happy dance right
Yes,
now.
I bet you are. I bet you are. But before we do that, we did commit to having public comment at the end of each item.
Absolutely.
So any public comments on this particular item?
Sure, we have no hands raised, but we do have one in-person public comment from Mr. Betta.
No hands raised on Zoom?
Nope.
Harmony came here and said she wasn't going to study the crisis and the effect on the operation or the overall financial position, and she was right. And viewed from the outside in, this is a major crisis. It's okay to talk about it and solve it. What I mean is this, you may be looking at a deficit budget when things are adjusted. That's okay, because we're going to get to the solutions. Pete, you've put together an amazing commission here. We can get to the solutions. Don't be afraid of changing it and making it deficit. If we're talking about being conservative, that John says over and over again, then roll it back to what our two consultants said. That is the right thing to do for our community and buy these revenues. This grant, culture. I'm hearing over and over again someone saying they'll get back to you. Who's accountable for getting back to you? Because that didn't happen in Armonet's administration. There were consultants, and then they did what they want. Scott Miller, where does this guy fit in? That's a whole different question. I haven't seen the staff, John, come to you and say there was some movement here. He's come back with the same numbers repeatedly, and he's standing his ground. This is not the time to do that. He should be leading the suggestions for ratcheting these things down and actually being conservative. How much money have we spent on consultants this year? And I can't be afraid of telling you that the ACFR was misrepresented deliberately in this chamber. Bank reconciliations have been explained as something he's doing correctly. He promised you that. And now you have a situation where he's telling you that in October, you'll get actuals. I can tell you, as a by the way, on July 1st, I would give you that preliminary ledger, both revenue and expenditure, and it's not hard to explain the accruals. October is unacceptable. Will he be managing the audit at that point? We haven't answered that question either. It's not enough to say, trust me. The staff has burned too many bridges. It's okay for me to say that, for us to embrace that. It's not about trust me. Roll it back to NHA and Statler. Just do it.
Any other public comments?
No other hands are raised. No other cards have been submitted. Chair.
Thank you very much. With that, let's take a 5-minute stretch break, bio break, and we'll return. And now you are I sat down one, huh? No, ma'am, we don't have Janet back yet. Thank you so much, everyone. We're about to reconvene. Ted, I don't know about the rest of the commission, so I'll speak for myself. There are two questions in CIP that, through your number of great explanations, things that keep me awake at night. First question is the number of dollars that we have potential for losing as we're in a use it or lose it situation. So that scares me, continues to scare me. So as you walk through this, could you help my sleep a little bit? That would be helpful. That's number one. And number two, something that's been pointed out, and frankly, it's something we're all interested in, is the percentage of projects, the money spent versus what's budgeted seems to be consistently low. Could you explain how that happens and why that is happening? So again, that's just two underlying themes I'd like you to address for me personally as you go through your presentation. Okay. Yes.
Thank you for those questions. So, with regard to our discussion tonight, we're essentially picking up where we left off last time we were together with the special meeting. We haven't made any changes to any of the documents. It's that time, intentionally, so that we could just follow along from where we were. So, we're really looking at, probably for the purposes of our discussion, based on what you just said, the previous prioritization list that we provided you. If you can't find it in your packet there, I just reprinted that same page if you need it. We've got a stack over here. But to answer your initial question, well, okay, so, just recapping, during that session, the council approved the CIP program's consistency with the general plan. So from a programmatic perspective, we're moving forward with generally the types of projects that we have on our list. The next step, of course, is for us to talk specifically about appropriations and to start to finalize that list of appropriations for the 24-25 budget to be adopted at some point in the future. So Chair, to your questions, which the first one was talking about lapsing funding. I don't know if it's helpful or not for us to sort of go through the list and talk about it that way. Or, how you'd like to have that conversation.
Whatever is easier.
Sure. So generally we're talking about lapsing funding. We're talking about things outside of the stuff that's usually paid for by general fund. So, our building and facilities projects don't necessarily have funding that's at risk. Same with our housing funding. That's just a regular revenue stream that comes in. IT funding, the same. Library and community services, for the most part, nothing there is lapsing. We do have multiple funding sources for the Grevillea and Berkshire Pocket Parks, but we're not really at risk at losing any of that funding since we're so close to construction starting. I'd say where we have risks are we have like a small risk with regard to stormwater funding. If something's related to Measure W, then we only have so many years to spend it. We're going through Measure W's first, because Measure W is a new funding source from the county. We're going through Measure W's first triennial audit right now. So once we have a better understanding of ours and other cities' performance in spending that funding, we'll probably have a better perspective of what is potential to lose in the future, but we don't have any potential loss of any money at the moment.
Ted, when you say stormwater, that's 9,007, correct?
That's right.
And-
Yes,
and if I'm
exactly.
reading this correctly, the chart that you added, all of those projects are in process.
That's right.
So
Yes.
That's in an effort to ensure that we do not lose that funding.
It's there's multiple reasons. Number one is funding. The primary reason that those are all in progress is the strict compliance requirements on the city. Like we have to implement these projects. We have to implement them. For some reason, it's because the project needs to be done, but for more so, it's because the city needs to meet pollution mitigation requirements. Excuse me, by a certain date. And so those projects have to move forward. With regard to sustainability, we do have a spending schedule for the City Hall electric vehicle charging systems that's associated with the MSRC agreement to electrify the police force and install the charging equipment. There's no risk there because we're moving on schedule with that program, and we have several years to spend the money. So that's not a risk. It's just there is a funding schedule for that. I'd say your biggest risks are the sidewalk replacement and repairs, the streets project 9,008. We get about $100,000 a year from it's basically HUD money that trickles down to the Community Development Block Grant Program, and the LA County Development Authority controls that money. And so you see that we've got several $100,000 being carried over. That's several years of money that's accrued because it hasn't been spent. So we're trying to spend almost all of that money this fall so that we can not lose it. And it's on a large sidewalk ADA ramp project that's at different locations in the city. That project's in design. We hope to bid the project within the next month or so and be constructing it in the fall. That one has some risk to it if we don't finish that on time.
So it needs to be finished or started?
Has to be finished.
Finished by the end of the year.
Pretty much the end
Calendar-
of this calendar
the
year.
calendar year.
Yeah.
That seems aggressive. Am I?
It is aggressive, but we've known this for, some months. That's why we've been trying to pursue it pretty aggressively. That's why the prioritization is so high on it. You see it as like a number 5 overall, just to get this project done. We've worked out this schedule with CDBG. And so that's really, why we have, it's one of our top priorities for our engineering division. Beyond that one, there are some risks in the transportation and traffic area. So, I mentioned earlier the Rogan funding. If we really hadn't started that, we would have lost that money. Right now, the project's in progress, but it's pending environmental review by Caltrans and Federal Highway Administration. So that's kind of out of our control. So as long as we're, on the same page with them, we don't have an immediate risk of losing that money. We just have to keep the project going. The Fremont Huntington projects, that money is in lapsing territory. We're trying to work right now with like 2 different parts of Metro to keep that funding going for the next couple of years. We're really supposed to spend most of that money by late 2025, late 2026. We have done quite a bit of work on the projects. We're about to move into the design phases. So, again, not an immediate risk of losing funding, but we're trying to keep that money available. Some of these other projects here, like 5129, 5130, these are MSP funded, measure M MSP funded. So the money is allocated to the city on like a per capita basis. So the risk of losing it is low, but we are technically supposed to spend this money, as part of a funding agreement. So we've got these projects already started. I'd say the biggest risk, the other big risk on this list is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons project. That was federally funded. We did a lot of things last year to try to keep that funding. We had, we included it in our funding plan with Metro, but we're still trying to convince Federal Highway Administration, and Metro's helping us advocate for this to hold on to that funding for a little longer. That project had a lot of complications to it to develop it correctly. We're in the final stages of the bid package development, and we're supposed to be releasing this, in a month or so to build also this fall. The Fair Oaks Interchange project, the project that Councilmember Braun was referring to earlier as used to be the hook ramp project. That money too is part of a funding agreement. It's basically the old 710 money. It's not immediately at risk, but we really do need to consider how we're going to spend that money. Other cities are doing that as well, like Pasadena. Not that it's going to get taken away, but it really, Metro and Caltrans are expecting us to come up with a plan for expending that. And we do have that. We're working on a funding agreement with Metro for that money right now. I think that's, as far as lapsing risk, I think that pretty much covers it. It's mostly in the transportation area, a little bit in the sidewalk area, and generally on some of the other special funds like stormwater.
The thing that impresses me the most when we went through that is those are the things that are most visible to our neighbors: sidewalks, transportation. These are the things that our neighbors are most concerned about. And at one point, as a matter of fact, a couple of times, this group has suggested to you that either you contract it out or get contract labor or staff up or both. Hopefully, when we see the expense report next week, that'll be represented within that report.
So let's address that. So, we very clearly saw this issue, over a year ago with regard to executing these projects. That's why we petitioned to the council to create a transportation program manager position, and we funded that with Measure M and Measure R. It took us a long time to fill that position, hire it, and we did. And that's the reason we actually still have a lot of that funding right now, because that person that was in the position helped us correct a lot of the issues and update the funding agreements. They were recruited to another agency just a couple of months ago, and so we lost that position. We have a lot of on-call consultants as far as transportation goes. We have a whole list, and each one of these projects currently has an on-call consultant connected to it. The issue there is having that overarching program management over transportation particularly. And I'm excising streets from that, like street repair. I'm kind of considering that as a separate thing, but this group of transportation projects. So we're trying to actively rehire that position right now. We've got applications we've got in hand, scheduling interviews. so that we can get that going again. So you won't probably see any significant change anytime soon because the consultants that we have who are working on it are already routinely billing us. It's just a matter of keeping the momentum going on those projects by rehiring that position that just recently left and, moving forward.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Glad you're actively recruiting and hiring.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I think one of the things that was discussed at the last meeting was having some form of division that kind of focused so that they weren't pulled away from doing the daily operations and they could really be focused on moving these projects along and also looking at contract management and grants management to make sure that those were in line as well. And just recognizing that otherwise those daily calls pull somebody away and keeps somebody from being able to move it all along. But if you have someone who's transportation only, which I understand the need for it, but if you have a little redundancy, it wouldn't hurt. Right?
Yeah, so the transportation aspect, because of its tie-in to the just the
Right.
unique nature and issues in the San Gabriel Valley and
Mhm.
South Pasadena alone is perfect for a staff position.
Right.
Is what we're trying to rehire. What you're referring to, I think, is more on the streets and water and sewer side, which we did talk about focusing on. We did talk to several of our consultants for that. Looking to contract those positions. We got a couple resumes submitted to us of folks that we need to interview and talk to see if they're right for that program and project management consultant
Mhm.
roles. And that's what we're going to pursue. And that's, as we talked about last time, we've restructured the way that these budgets are presented so that we can take a component of these budgets and apply them to that, those very expensive hourly rates for those program and project managers.
Mhm.
And that's the next step would be basically taking those items to council for approving a task order with an already contracted professional services vendor so that we can spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on these staff members, these augmented staff members,
Right.
contractors.
Right. Which I think makes sense because it doesn't make sense to me to, give you a $16 million budget, but not give you the resources to execute that budget.
Yeah.
So one of the things from a budget perspective that I'd like to add in, and actually we need to be looking at adding it to the rest of the budget for the different departments, is the KPIs. So I pulled up some specific examples of KPIs. I think creating this first year as a baseline year and then moving towards how we would rethink the capital improvements project budget based on these KPIs for future years. Because my feeling is that it was one of those throw this all into this giant CIP budget without making sure that you're actually trying to, not you, but that there's the resources provided to get them accomplished. So one thing I'd like to see added, we all loved your chart and bringing in that, and that's very helpful. I think bringing into the CIP plan the time for each budget, each project, sorry, so that you can have a percentage of capital projects completed on time and be able to start gauging that. Then looking at another KPI would be percentage of capital projects completed within budget, and that would be the base budget. So there's an ability to track that over time when we see that the budgets, when projects get higher in expense along the way. And I can send these all to you as well, but there's a percentage of projects initiated within 12 months of funding authorization. I think that might be a critical one for the CIP plan because, I think it was interesting to see such a large list given to you. And I think it was not, it's not helpful, right? Because you actually, this I think is great what you did coming with the prioritization, but I think when you're hit with that many, it's hard to focus because you're feeling this pressure from everybody's projects and everyone has a different idea of what to prioritize. So I love that you've come with some prioritization. But so these are just some KPIs to recommend. I think it would take off some pressure if that was an understanding that that was something that you'd be looking at, which was how many things you started within 12 months of funding authorization, and maybe that would reduce the list of things that people threw onto your plate to try to get done in this year. Sorry, you can.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, yeah, I think that'd be a helpful list to have. We, we have proposed a list of KPIs associated with, our department
Mhm.
for the coming fiscal year. They're mostly operational in nature. I think
Mhm.
some of them relate to streets and sidewalks a little bit, but
Mhm.
they're mostly operational in nature, and they're associated with the fiscal year itself. I
Mhm.
think if we were to take some of the KPIs that you're recommending and apply them to like a multi-year CIP, like the
Mhm.
5-year CIP where a project budget could be like 3-4 years long.
Correct, correct.
I think that'd be a helpful way,
Mhm.
a helpful metric, to report on. Because, as I mentioned, it's hard for us to, we tried to simplify project status for you in this particular
Mhm.
instance. But project status is a really complicated thing, right? Like some projects are at 10% design and
Right,
people might
right.
not really understand what that means in terms of like the total life cycle of the project.
Mhm.
So, if you have some suggestions about ways to convey some simple metric that can identify something
For
for a project, that'd be
initiation,
helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I think the idea being that we use this coming year, if, I'll share these different KPIs with you, but use this coming year as a baseline and working on how to improve the CIP budgeting process so that it's most effective for your department and helping with that process. Yeah. What do you think?
Yes, and I'd like to add on another, just to plant a seed, Ted, then I can help you develop this down the road if it would be helpful to you. Think of yourselves as a consulting firm that works for the city and how you would bill out each one of your people. That's enables you to, if you have an opening, then that your KPI is adjusted based upon the fact that you're down 1 or 2 or 3 head count. And then the spend for that year would be driven by the number of headcount you have. The same way a consulting firm bills itself out.
Sure, and I understand that because I used to work in that environment.
Okay.
I think the only major distinction here, and I tried to draw this in our last few meetings, was that, since we only have a certain percentage of staff that are associated with project delivery and project development, we could do that, but it would be limited to that portion of their time. Whereas like,
Makes
I learned the differences between private staff management and public staff management a long time ago. And, that changes with regard to the
I'm
demand.
still
and
learning,
the-
so
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So in part, we might be able to do something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's the resources that we're talking about is making sure that you have the staffing for that project development initiation, right? To get that moving along the lines. Because I just don't, I just don't think it's helpful to you in particular or your team to feel this pressure. And without the understanding of like, this is the kind of the resources that it takes, and this is what we're actually trying to work towards. I mean, you had an exhaustive list of capital improvement projects that there was no way you were going to be able to get to.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, that there's no mitigating that pressure. It exists, and it's really just about understanding the council's priorities
Yeah.
so that we can apply the time appropriately regardless of the pressure. And we need some sort of method for, we get project ideas and requests daily from the
Right.
community. Some of them have to be risen to the level of the commissions and the council for
Mhm.
consideration because they're community feedback. Some have to be sort of deferred or, discussed and sort of pushed back because they don't align with council priorities. So, I think that if there's a collective consensus from the commissions and the council that we've got this list of priorities and this is what staff's going to focus on, knowing that there's lots of other things happening and there's lots of other pressures and
Sure.
things like that, I think that we can confidently move forward with what we're doing
Right.
under that support.
Yeah, and Ted, please use us because we do have some influence with city council. And so please use us when things are out of kilter, out of whack, because we'd be delighted to be part of your support system. We are, first and foremost, we are residents of this city. So we appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Ted, I think we gave you some guidance. I just want to make sure you feel that the council has set the priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why, you know, barring the finalization of appropriations at some point soon in the future, we're still moving forward with the plans to.
Yeah, the streets, and the streets.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're already,
And then sewer and water as well.
yeah, and so we're already pursuing the design, contractual arrangements that we need to move forward with the plan that we discussed on the 18th. And then we're also already, like I mentioned, trying to finalize those staffing arrangements that you had asked for to bring to council for approval. Yeah, we do. But I guess to my point, it's like, it's a continual choice that the council has to continue making, so that we can stay on task for these projects and when other things come up and other priorities and other issues in the city.
Well, and I think that's why some of the KPIs that I'm recommending is actually not so much even for you, but as much as for the council, so that they're understanding what they're asking. And okay, well, if you're having trouble changing, completing these on time, why? And understanding if there's a resource issue. It's not enough to just authorize the funding. They got to make sure that you've got the right resources to complete the project.
Sure, and I think to the, what the council has provided us is, we didn't, let's take streets, for example. We didn't have a whole lot of clarity. I mean, we as in terms of the city didn't have a whole lot of clarity on how we should progress through a street improvement program of the future. It was basically on an annual basis, taking a look at what should we do the next year. So having this long range plan, which will totally have to be adjusted and modified over the years, but I think having support for that gives us enough long-term direction to, have confidence to move forward through it, rather than just like not knowing what will happen every July 1.
So, commissioners, any other comments or questions regarding the CIP?
No.
Okay. So Ted, there are three major components that I think I recall. One is make sure that you come back to us with your staffing needs, whether it be contractual or full-time or both. Make sure that you continue to come back, or you think through and come back to us with KPIs that are stretch KPIs for you, but things that you believe you can actually live with and complete based upon your staff and what your understanding of the city council's demands upon you. And please fix the streets.
Sure.
Because you heard that over here. Okay.
On the second one, if you do have ideas on metrics that are easily digested by the community, that would be helpful for us, because we have all sorts of ideas on how to portray what's happening here. And we may have thought we were being successful many times over the last year and perhaps fell short of that. So if you have like just general ideas about how you'd like that to be expressed, that'd be helpful too.
Ted, I'll be
Perfect.
you're right.
Yes.
These are great.
Great. Okay.
I
Good.
love these.
Yeah.
I love them. They're
Very
easy
helpful.
to read. They have a ton of information in them.
And
That's great
I
to
Very
think-
well presented.
I think you need to rely on city council to explain the metrics to the population. For you to spend 1 ounce of energy doing that, I think is a poor use of your energy. City council, if they're approving it, they should be able to explain to their neighbors why they approved what they approved and how they rank ordered those things.
Well, I guess my point is that, and I don't want to belabor it, is, as far as project performance goes, in many circumstances, the amount of money expended, especially in the early phases of a project, might not be a good indicator like how well that project's going.
Right.
So in that perspective, like other indicators might be more helpful. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, dollars spent and, I guess, project, oh, pardon me, project progress against plan.
Look, I mean, any large sort of project, right? You've got, if you put together the timeline and you break it down into a project plan timeline, that helps you understand where the progression is. So if you made it through this percentage of the design phase, or you've made it through this percentage of like the, say like the foundation, like the foundation takes forever. It's not the exciting part and everyone's looking at a giant hole for a while, but then all of a sudden, the giant building will come up. So I think just putting together a project timeline, and then using and breaking it down percentage wise to understand that's where it'll come. And knowing that there's time in the design phase that can be considerable. Right.
Mhm. Exactly.
So it's not just about dollars spent, but it's, this design phase can take a significant portion of it before you've, dug into the dirt yet, right?
Yeah,
So-
exactly. And in the case of, say, the end of an environmental phase, no dollars are spent because we're just waiting on approvals for,
Right.
long time period of time. So understood.
Yeah, but if we have the project timelines for each of those, then people will have an understanding of like, okay, you're on track. If you thought it was going to take 3 months to go through this environmental phase or whatnot, and that helps everybody understand these are where the delays are. And there's also usually an explanation for that. So on the environmental phase, for instance, it may not be anything to do with your staffing. It might have to do with staffing from another agency, right? So there are other factors that can come in and say, okay, well, that's not, it's so in a lot of ways, it's actually helpful because it helps explain to people like, this is where it got stuck. Yeah.
Right.
Ted, I hate to add, put another rock in your backpack, but I am. It's up to you to teach the citizens of South Pasadena how to evaluate you and what is an appropriate criteria against which you should be measured. So you could probably use the new website and the top 10 projects, talk about progress on those projects in the new website. So somebody can click and understand why there's still a hole in the ground at some place and what you're waiting for. There's a way to teach us how to consume your services intelligently and with appreciation. Okay.
Let's add on to Chair Giuliani. I think part of the reason we're giving you this feedback is because we do appreciate you.
Yes.
And so understand that the competence is there and want to make sure that you feel that, right? And that okay, this is the way to show it to other people in case you're getting that, like, where are these projects? Like, so I think you're having an understanding set up here that's like, okay, let's help you out to make sure that's demonstrated out to the community.
So thank you, Ted. Commissioners, any other comments for Ted as he prepares his final budget for presentation to City Council?
Thank you for the work that you've done so far. It's been very good.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ted. And you didn't have to stand up here nearly as long as John.
That's right.
So John wins, okay? So wherever you guys go after this, you buy. Okay. Okay. Commissioners, I'm feeling very good about where we're sitting in this moment. City Council liaison, any communication?
Chair, we actually have one public comment
Oh,
for this
I am
item.
so sorry. You're right.
Mr. Betta.
Esteban, thank you for keeping me honest.
Thank you, Esteban. Back in my day, we were proud to be a small city that was full service. Running an enterprise, our own library, our own police and fire, and we were one of the smallest in the state of California to do it. Today, we've become, probably with Sergio Gonzalez, Kubraisian, a contract city. There's a lot of money going out the door for contracts. Armane took it to the limit. I beg you, when you get to expenditures, to look at fluffy contracts for unnecessary consultants. There's a lot of money there. But my point is, Ted is too self-effacing. You're a good man. What this commission has done to capture this CIP topic is most commendable. You've got it. You've got it. What Ted deserves is a full-scale purchasing department. We are a contract city now. General fund supported. Priority. Is there a greater priority? Janet, there's not. Then processing, I spoke for you. Then processing contracts. I had someone do this for me at a water district. I couldn't believe how good we were. In general fund cities don't embrace it. I beg you to create a purchasing department and make changes in trade-offs beginning next week. It is the best money you can spend. I beg you. 6 years, 7 years without a financial report on capital projects. He deserves much better. Encumbrance accounting. When you have a purchasing department, those contracts are processed. That contract is represented as an encumbrance. Encumbrance plus expenditures is his financial progress. I look forward to seeing it. It hasn't been done since Christ was a corporal. I really look forward to it. I ask LSL, under your direction, to evaluate this capital projects fund, the enormous amount of transfers, journal entries that are required. John admitted to me it increases the accounting greatly. Why don't we ask Sue Lee about that? She saw a different way of doing it. And Ted, now that you're liberated, don't worry about your wacky city council all the time. Tell them what your priorities are. You'll get there. You're spreading your wings. The wicked witch is dead.
Thank you, Jack, Josh. And I'm just thinking about certain members of our city council flying. There's a mental picture that I have in this moment. Evelyn, you're in charge of that, okay? Any final comments, Janet?
Just thank you. Thanks.
Commissioner Rossi? Staff, thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for our going along with us. I remember. Okay, I had a note to myself. Okay, and thank you for the reminder, Evelyn. We do have to thank someone who has kept me straight for the last year and a half or so, and who has worked diligently here at our city. I am saddened on a personal and a professional basis to see her leave, and I challenge whoever comes in to this city relationship to recruit her back. I will be part of that recruitment team.
Yes.
So Stephanie, with that, round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now that we've embarrassed her, okay, it is my pleasure to call this meeting adjourned at 8:18.